Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've had a strange or unexplained experience, feel free to send it to me. The first story happened more than 25 years ago in St. Augustine. Two college freshmen were walking through the historic part of town at around 3 in the morning when they saw a young woman alone on the street. She was wearing a colonial-style dress and carrying flowers. When she spoke to them, neither of them could understand her. So settle in, relax, and sleep well tonight. This happened during my first year of college, back in the summer of 2000. I was playing baseball for a small college in northern Florida, and even though classes had already ended, our team still had one final tournament in Orlando. After it was over, we returned to campus, but the place was practically empty. Most of the older players had cars, so they packed up and drove home. Freshmen like me weren't allowed to keep vehicles on campus, which meant we had to stay behind until our families could come get us. A night or two after we returned, one of my teammates, Daniel, and I decided to walk around the historic part of St. Augustine. We had nothing else to do, and it was a warm, quiet night, so we wandered around for hours, talking about baseball, school, and what we planned to do over the summer. By the time we reached St. George Street, it must have been close to 3 in the morning. Everything was closed. The restaurants were dark, the shops were locked, and the streets were completely deserted. It felt as though the whole city had gone to sleep. Then we turned a corner and saw someone standing farther down the street. It was a young woman, maybe 18 or 19 years old. She was wearing a long, old-fashioned dress that looked like something from the colonial period. She had pale hair, almost silver blonde beneath the streetlights, and she was carrying a small basket filled with flowers. She kept walking back and forth across the same patch of street. There was nobody else around. No tourists, no employees cleaning up, no cars passing by. Just her. Daniel and I slowed down, but we kept walking toward her. When we were about 10 feet away, she suddenly stopped pacing and turned to face us. Then she began speaking. I couldn't understand a single word. At first, I thought she might be speaking Spanish, but Daniel spoke Spanish fluently, and he looked just as confused as I felt. The language didn't sound familiar to either of us. It had a strange rhythm to it, almost soft and musical, but nothing she said made any sense. We tried asking if she needed help. We asked where she was from and whether she was lost. She just continued speaking in that same unfamiliar language. There was something unsettling about the whole situation, but she didn't seem frightened or threatening. If anything, she looked sad, almost as though she were waiting for someone who was never going to arrive. After a minute or two, Daniel and I exchanged a look and slowly walked around her. Neither of us knew what else to do. Once we had gone a little farther down the street, we both turned around. She was still standing there beneath the streetlight, holding that basket of flowers and watching us leave. We kept walking, but we didn't talk much after that. Even then, we knew how strange it was. Why would someone that young be alone at 3 in the morning, dressed in clothing from another century, carrying flowers and speaking a language that neither of us recognized? Of course, there could have been a normal explanation. Maybe she was an actress from one of the historical tours. Maybe she was confused, troubled, or simply playing some kind of elaborate joke. But none of those explanations ever felt quite right. More than 2 decades have passed, and I still think about her sometimes. I can still picture that empty street, the glow of the old lamps, and that lonely young woman pacing quietly with her basket of flowers. And every now and then, I wonder whether Daniel and I crossed paths with someone who had been wandering St. George Street for far longer than either of us could possibly understand. Honestly, at 3 years old, I don't think a child would automatically understand that something was paranormal. They probably wouldn't call it a ghost unless they had already heard that word somewhere. They would just describe what they saw, or tell you that something was frightening them. When my oldest, Eli, was around 2.5, we lived in a very old apartment that always felt a little unusual. His bedroom opened off the main living area, and one wall had this huge built-in bookcase. At first, it looked completely ordinary, but the whole bookcase was mounted on heavy, rusted hinges. When you pulled it open, there was a narrow storage room hidden behind it. The building was made of old red brick, and the floors were dark wood. Our bedroom was at the far end of the apartment, past the kitchen and bathroom, so whenever Eli woke up, we could hear the soft shuffle of his footed pajamas coming down the hallway. The strange part was that sometimes we would hear those little footsteps when Eli was still asleep in bed. Not long after that, he began sleepwalking. We would find him standing silently in the hallway, staring ahead as though he were looking through us. He wouldn't answer when we spoke to him or react when we touched his shoulder. We would gently guide him back to bed, tuck him in, and hope it was nothing more than a childhood phase. Then he became fascinated with the hidden room. He called it the book room and constantly asked to play inside it. I always said no. That space made me deeply uncomfortable. It had no windows, no vents, and no obvious reason to be so cold. Yet whenever the bookcase swung open, a rush of icy air seemed to spill into the bedroom. One evening, Eli told me there was another little boy living in the book room. At first, I assumed he had invented an imaginary friend. But then he said the boy came into his bedroom at night and scared him while he was sleeping. He described the boy standing beside his bed, watching him. That was when I made what we called monster spray. It was really just a lightly scented room spray diluted with water, but I gave Eli his own little bottle. Before bed, he would spray the corners of his room, the hallway, and especially the bookcase. Whether the little boy was real or imagined, the spray helped Eli feel that he had some control over whatever was frightening him. Over the following months, the apartment seemed to grow heavier. We had several painful family problems, and I experienced a pregnancy loss while we were living there. Eventually, it felt as though too much sadness had settled into that place. We moved out before our lease ended. Surprisingly, the property managers were incredibly understanding. One of them quietly mentioned that tenants rarely stayed in that apartment for very long. So my advice is simply to listen to your child without immediately telling them what they are experiencing. Ask gentle, open questions. Who did you see? What did they look like? Where were they standing? How did they make you feel? If the answers are playful or constantly changing, it may just be an active imagination. Children also notice when a certain subject gets a strong reaction, so they may continue mentioning it because they sense our curiosity. Still, I completely understand wanting to take your child seriously and make sure nothing is genuinely frightening them. You could create a calm little bedtime ritual without making the situation feel bigger or scarier. Open the windows, let fresh air move through the rooms, light a candle or some incense, and say a prayer that your home remains peaceful and protected. Picture the light reaching every dark corner and the smoke carrying away anything that does not belong there. Your child can take part in a simple, comforting way. You might tell them that the candle represents safety and kindness, and that when they blow it out, the smoke carries their worries away. A small spray bottle filled with water and a drop or two of a gentle, child-safe scent can also become their own bedtime monster spray. Whether the fear comes from imagination or something we cannot explain, helping a child feel heard, safe, and empowered can make an enormous difference. Sometimes a little reassurance, love, and intention are the strongest protections a home can have. I've believed in ghosts for as long as I can remember, mostly because I've seen and felt things I simply couldn't explain. For years, my family didn't really believe me. My mom even admitted that, at one point, she worried something might be wrong with me. So whenever someone else experienced something strange while I was there, it made me feel less alone. It was proof that these things weren't only happening inside my head. The experience I remember most happened when I was about 13. That summer, I went to stay with my 2 cousins in Carson for a couple of weeks. Before I left, my mom gave me a warning. She said, "Don't call me after 3 days asking to come home because you got scared." A few relatives had already claimed that strange things happened inside the house my aunt and uncle had recently moved into. But I promised my mom I would stay the entire visit. I packed my things, said goodbye, and left feeling completely confident. For the first couple of nights, everything seemed normal. All 3 of us were sleeping in my older cousin's bedroom because her younger sister refused to sleep alone in her own room. Looking back, that probably should have told me something. My older cousin let the 2 of us sleep on the bed while she made a spot for herself on the floor. Sometime after 2 in the morning, she suddenly sat up and said, "Girl, stop pulling my blanket." Her sister immediately answered, "That's not me. I'm all the way over here by the wall." I was the closest person to her, but there was no way I could have reached the blanket. The bed was so high that I practically had to climb onto it. After that, all 3 of us were awake. A few minutes later, the cousin beside me said she needed to use the bathroom. The bathroom door opened directly into the bedroom, and for some reason, that entire corner of the room felt unsettling. I asked her to make sure she closed the door when she finished. She came back, shut it, and walked around the foot of the bed to get to her side. The moment she passed in front of me, I saw it. There was a shadow standing at the foot of the bed, right beside my feet. My cousin climbed back into bed without saying anything, and I assumed she hadn't noticed it. Meanwhile, I was completely frozen. I was lying curled on my side, facing the bottom of the bed, so I was staring directly at it. This wasn't something I caught from the corner of my eye. I could see it clearly. The room was almost completely dark. There was only a thin line of streetlight coming through the curtains and the faint green glow of a digital clock. But somehow, the figure was even darker than the darkness around it. It didn't have a face or any clear features, but I knew it was a man. He was tall, and he appeared to be wearing some kind of wide-brimmed hat. Maybe a fedora. Maybe an old-fashioned cowboy hat. I couldn't tell. What felt like several minutes passed. Then my cousin quietly whispered my nickname. I answered, "Yeah?" She said, "I don't want to scare you, but there's a man standing by your feet." And I whispered back, "I know." That was the moment my fear became real. She could see him too. I started repeating the Lord's Prayer inside my head. I said it again and again, begging God to make the figure disappear. Finally, I prayed, "Please, when I turn and face it completely, let it be gone." I gathered enough courage to move, but when I turned, the shadow didn't vanish instantly. It slowly collapsed downward, almost as though it were melting through the floor, until there was nothing left. I have no idea how I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up while my cousins were getting ready for a dentist appointment. My aunt told me I could stay behind and sleep a little longer. Absolutely not. I threw on my sandals and left the house with them without even brushing my hair. And yes, I called my mom later that day. I told her exactly what we had seen and asked her to come get me that weekend. Thankfully, she did. Until she arrived, I made my cousin sleep with the television and every light in the room turned on. I had promised I wouldn't call home because I was scared. But after seeing a shadow man dissolve into the floor at the foot of my bed, I decided that was one promise I was perfectly comfortable breaking. This is going to sound strange, but every few years, something happens in my house that I simply cannot explain. It isn't constant. Most of the time, the house feels completely normal. But when these incidents happen, they genuinely frighten me. The first one happened in late 2023. My partner and I were sitting in the living room when we suddenly heard an incredibly loud rattling noise coming from the kitchen. It was so violent that we could hear it clearly from downstairs and even from the upper floor. We both rushed into the kitchen and found a small electric kitchen gadget running at full power, shaking an entire tray of cutlery beside it. Forks and spoons were jumping around everywhere. We stood there watching until it finally stopped. Then I picked it up and checked it. There were no batteries inside. My partner had seen exactly what I had seen, so I knew I hadn't imagined it. Neither of us could explain it, and honestly, it felt too disturbing to investigate. We simply put everything back and tried to move on. The second incident happened just a few days ago. I was cleaning the hallway and the door leading into the kitchen was closed. Our cats were inside the kitchen. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable roar of our old hairy vacuum cleaner running at full power. I opened the door and saw one of the cats standing beside it, calmly sniffing the machine. My first thought was that the cat had somehow switched it on. I even said, "Hey, what have you done?" But when I walked closer, I froze. The vacuum wasn't plugged into the wall. The cable was completely rolled up inside the machine. The power button was visibly in the off position, yet the motor was roaring, and I could feel warm air blowing against my legs from the rear filter, exactly as it does when the vacuum is operating normally. I panicked and began pressing the power switch on and off. After a few attempts, the sound suddenly stopped. I just stood there thinking, no, absolutely not. This cannot be happening. Then I said out loud, "Whatever you are, don't play with me." I laughed afterward, but it was nervous laughter. I didn't find any of it funny. I posted about the incident online, hoping someone familiar with vacuum cleaners could offer a logical explanation. Everyone told me the same thing. A corded vacuum cannot run without electricity powering its motor. Some people suggested checking for carbon monoxide or a gas leak, saying those things can cause confusion or hallucinations. Our detectors were working, the house had been regularly ventilated, and everyone else was fine. My partner felt normal, the cats were behaving normally. Nothing unusual was happening before or after the incident. When I nervously asked my partner whether she could smell gas, she laughed and told me how ridiculous I sounded. And honestly, I understood why. But she also knew something strange had happened because these incidents seemed to appear only once every few years. Then something else happened almost immediately after the vacuum stopped. I opened Instagram and noticed that all my friends' story circles had disappeared. In their place were suggested contacts. I know Instagram glitches sometimes, so that alone didn't concern me. What disturbed me was that only one suggested profile had the glowing ring that normally indicates a new story. It belonged to someone I had deliberately removed from my life, a man named Soren, who claimed to practice shamanism. His was the only profile glowing. I opened his page, but there was no active story and no ring around his profile picture. I refreshed the app several times. Each time, his picture continued glowing in the story section, even though nothing appeared on his actual profile. It frightened me enough that I blocked him completely. A few minutes later, everything returned to normal. Maybe every part of this has a rational explanation. I'm open to that possibility. But when you are standing in front of a vacuum cleaner that is roaring, blowing air, and visibly unplugged, logic suddenly feels very far away. That is why I believe people when they tell me they have experienced something they cannot explain. It is easy for others to dismiss these stories because they were not there. We were. Sometimes strange experiences seem to affect the physical world. Sometimes they appear through technology, and sometimes they may influence only the way one person perceives what is happening. Whatever the truth is, I have the unsettling feeling that these things usually try not to be noticed. But every now and then, they make a mistake. Hello everyone. I want to share something that has been happening in my home for the past couple of years. Today was especially intense because, for the first time, someone outside my family witnessed something with their own eyes. After that, I knew the experiences my family and I had been having were not simply in our imagination. The strange activity began sometime in 2024. At first, it was subtle. There were small noises and unusual signs that were easy to dismiss. One evening, my mother and I were standing close to the front door when we clearly heard 3 loud knocks from outside. We opened the door almost immediately, but nobody was there. I checked our security cameras afterward, and they showed no one approaching or leaving the house. Not long after that, we began hearing our names being called when nobody else was nearby. Sometimes there were faint whispers coming from another room, but whenever we went to investigate, the house was completely quiet. Then, one night, I was alone in the bathroom when I heard heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. They were slow, clear, and loud enough that I could follow every step. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bathroom door. I was terrified because the doors to the house were locked, and I knew no one else was home. Through the small gap beneath the door, I saw what looked like a dark shadow standing on the other side. I gathered enough courage to open the door, but the hallway was empty. Whatever I had seen disappeared in an instant. Throughout 2025, we continued hearing tapping, footsteps, and unexplained sounds. They were unsettling, but nothing compared to what began happening in 2026. That was when the activity became much stronger. I started experiencing frightening episodes of sleep paralysis in the middle of the night. I would wake up unable to move, feeling as though something was close to me. On several mornings, I noticed painful red marks on my body. They were not scratches, but they looked like areas where pressure had been applied. A few months ago, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when something struck the outside of the window with a loud thud. I rushed outside to check, but there was nothing there. Our kitchen is above ground level, so it would have been extremely difficult for anyone to reach that window. When I came back inside, I was frightened and frustrated. I asked aloud whether a spirit had caused the sound. A loud voice seemed to answer, "Yes." That moment changed everything for me. I felt certain that something unexplained was inside our home, and that it wanted us to know it was there. Last month, my brother woke up in a panic because he felt someone grab or push him while he was sleeping. He said the touch was so forceful that he jumped out of bed, but when he looked around, nobody was in the room. Another strange incident happened with the 2 light switches near his bedroom. One of the lights turned on by itself without the switch visibly moving. Since then, the switch has behaved strangely, almost as though its on and off positions have been reversed. Then, 2 nights ago, at around 1:30 in the morning, I was quietly reading a prayer. While I was praying, I watched one of my shoes slide across the floor as though someone had kicked it. There was no breeze, no vibration, and no one else was near it. The following night, I had another frightening dream. A dark figure appeared beside me and seemed to attack me from both sides. I woke up in pain and noticed more red marks on my body. But today was the most disturbing day of all. My brother was cleaning his room and had left a pair of shoes on the floor outside. A friend came over to visit him. My mother and I were sitting in the kitchen when the friend greeted us and began walking upstairs. As he reached the landing, he suddenly started screaming. He said he had watched the shoes lift several inches off the floor and then drop back down. He was shaking and shouting that there was something in the house. My brother, my mother, and I hurried toward him. My mother was still skeptical, but I believed him immediately because I had watched one of my own shoes move only 2 nights earlier. What made the situation even more unsettling was that my brother's friend had never shown much interest in ghosts or paranormal stories. He had no idea what had been happening in our home. We brought out an EMF reader and placed it near the shoes. The device showed unusual readings, so we also used a temperature gun. It was a very hot summer afternoon. The temperature outside was above 35 degrees Celsius, and the room was around 30 degrees. We began asking questions and requested that the temperature drop to certain numbers if something was trying to communicate with us. To our shock, the temperature fell to 26 degrees. The room suddenly felt cold, and all of us had goosebumps. We continued asking for specific temperature changes, and several times the reading appeared to move toward the exact number we had requested. During this experience, we became convinced that whatever was present was not friendly. Whether it was truly a spirit, something darker, or another explanation we have not yet discovered, the atmosphere felt deeply threatening. I have contacted a pastor and asked him to come bless our home. We have tried a blessing before, and the activity seemed to stop for a while, but eventually it returned. I honestly do not know why this is happening to us. My family tries to live peacefully, and we have never intentionally harmed anyone. Still, it feels as though something unwanted has entered our home, and I am desperate to understand why it is here and how we can make the house feel safe again. Thank you for listening to my story and for taking it seriously. Please be kind in your responses. I will share another update if anything else happens. Hey, I want to share some really strange and chilling experiences that have happened to me and a few friends over the years. These stories might sound unbelievable, but every word is true, and I hope you'll feel what we felt. The fear, the confusion, and sometimes the awe. So, let's start with the question. Do you believe in Fae? About 2 autumns ago, when the leaves were fiery red and the air smelled crisp and fresh as it does in the Midwest, my family and I were getting ready for Halloween. We moved some things around on the front lawn to make space for decorations. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until things started disappearing. A few weeks before the decorating began, I'd bought a pair of Bluetooth earbuds, my daily companions, always tucked in my pocket. After setting up our Halloween decorations, I headed to the local big box store to grab groceries and some extra string lights. Later that evening, when I took a call, the earbuds were nowhere to be found. I was frustrated, but figured maybe I dropped them at the store. The next day, I went back, retraced every step, checked lost and found. Nothing. I resigned myself to the loss and ordered a new pair online. A couple of days later, the package arrived, still sealed with that cheerful smiley tape. But then, a few days later, while preparing dinner, Korean barbecue, my favorite, I went to get the grill pan from the corner kitchen cabinet, the dreaded corner cabinet where old appliances and pans go to die in the dark, dusty corners. But the grill pan wasn't there. We emptied the entire cabinet. My wife even crawled inside, flashlight in hand, trying to fish it out from the depths. No luck. Dinner that night was a letdown. 2 things vanished in quick succession. Was it a coincidence? My wife mentioned she'd seen a TikTok about the mischievous Fae, spirits who get upset if you disturb their homes, like moving things in the garden or yard. Being somewhat spiritual, we'd encountered Fae before. My wife had even left offerings for them. So I went outside, and in the quiet of the front yard, I spoke aloud, apologizing to the Fae for disturbing their space, explaining we were just decorating for the holidays. I left honey, bread, and milk as offerings. The next night, as I wrapped up some work upstairs, my child came running with the original missing earbuds, handing them to me with a smile. I thanked them and glanced down at my desk. There lay the new pair, unopened. I was stunned. I ran downstairs asking where they found the earbuds. My child said they'd been sitting on the coffee table, where we had searched thoroughly the night they disappeared. Later, while my wife took a bath, I braved the dreaded corner cabinet again, phone flashlight in hand, to retrieve the grill pan. And there it was, sitting right where it should have been. We couldn't explain how these two items returned, but I told my wife about the apology and offerings. Sometimes, just because we can't explain it, doesn't mean it's not real. Now, moving on to a story from about 15 years ago. My friend Ben's biological father had passed away before Ben got to know him. Ben was fearless, wild even, but my boyfriend at the time, Jake, was terrified. To ease his nerves, I gave him a Native American necklace I owned, one blessed for protection against spirits. We decided to try to contact Ben's dad using a Ouija board. We chose an abandoned church deep in the woods for the session. It was a hot, heavy night, and we were giggling from the devil's lettuce before things got serious. As the planchette moved, it spelled out Ben's father's name. I thought this was Ben's way of closure. But then the board spun wildly, and the word murder appeared. A cold shiver ran through me, even though the night was warm. Suddenly, the dilapidated pews shook violently, some toppling over. Panic flooded us. Jake was suddenly stuck, literally frozen to the floor, screaming. The building trembled, an icy chill filled the air, and I felt like someone stuffed a sock in my mouth, suffocating me. Ben and others fled by car, and I rushed to help Jake. We managed to carry him out, but he refused to speak about what happened, clutching the protection necklace tightly, convinced a demon might follow us. We never returned to that church, and to this day, I feel the darkness that lingered there. It was nothing natural. Now, here's a personal one. My life saved by a ghost. My boyfriend Mike had admired me for years before we met. In 2009, his best friend Josh tragically overdosed in the very bedroom Mike now uses. Since then, strange pranks happen. Sticky notes covering me in the morning, drinks mysteriously spilled, objects moved. We believe Josh's spirit is around, congratulating Mike in his own mischievous way. But in 2017, Josh did more than prank. I went into anaphylactic shock upstairs, unable to speak or move. I crawled toward the stairs, knowing the deadly risk if I fell. I saw Josh and two deceased friends carrying me to the living room, where my nebulizer and phone were. I called 911 but had no voice. Josh said he'd wake Mike, who then dreamed of Josh warning him. Mike rushed in as I was fading. His quick actions and the miraculous timing of an ambulance saved me. I never met Josh alive, but I recognized him immediately. His presence saved my life. One night around 10:30 p.m., my friends and I were at our usual playground hangout. Suddenly, I felt chills and heard a scream from the nearby woods, near a cave. My friend A heard it too, but dismissed it as tires screeching. 15 minutes later, an overwhelming sense of dread swept over all of us. Our friend R started heading into the woods, but I urged the group to stick to the light and take a longer route. As we approached the parking lot adjacent to the woods, silence fell. The crickets and frogs stopped their chorus. Then, the scream came again, closer this time, ice flowing through my veins. It didn't sound human or like any animal I knew. We sprinted to my car, locked the doors, and struggled to start it, twice. Once we got going, the school zone lights flashed red, and as we drove away, the courthouse lights went out. We were shaken, convinced whatever that was manipulated our surroundings and meant harm. When I graduated college, I lived in a residence hall that was rumored to be haunted. My senior year, I moved into the 5th floor, a floor infamous for repeated suicide attempts, and paranormal activity. Knocks at doors with no one there, disappearing objects, shadows manifesting. These became frequent. A drawing of the haunting showed a tall, skinny shadow with an unhinged jaw and elongated arms dragging on the floor. We called in friends with strong religious backgrounds who cleansed my room, giving me the strength to banish the spirit. After that, the haunting ceased, for me. But the next RA still reports the same activity. When I was about 6 or 7, sleeping in my parents' room with my sister, we saw a Cat in the Hat doll walking towards us. It was pure evil, cotton and fabric yet moving on its own. We screamed, jumping into our parents' bed. My mom saw it too. The doll collapsed when she looked at it. My dad never believed us, but that night was terrifying. In 2017, during a sleepover at my dad's house, my best friend Lex left the room to use the bathroom, but actually called her boyfriend for support, feeling panicked. Alone in the dark, I felt a suffocating evil presence press against my back, breathing slowly. The bed dipped as if someone got on the other side, but Lex hadn't entered. When she returned and turned on the lights, the presence vanished. My dad, a veteran, had a nightmare that night too. We cleansed the room with holy water, and the darkness never returned. Currently, I'm going through a divorce and moved to my mom's house. At my old home, shadows dashed the halls, phantom voices echoed, and a little girl's shadow jumped from our bed. Paranormal investigators even saw the little girl. At my mom's, I see something moving in the bathroom corner. My sister's dogs bark and chase unseen things. One night, I heard pacing barefoot on the bathroom tiles until dawn. The fear is real and relentless. When I was 11, my family found a 4-foot doll with hideous 80s clothes and a mullet in our garage. Nobody claimed it, but it seemed to bring bad luck. My grandma, transporting it to Mexico, had a terrible accident. The doll survived. Strange noises and poltergeist activity followed. After throwing the doll away, I woke choking at 1 a.m., unable to breathe, the room moving beneath me. My brother saved me. A healer cleansed me, warning the doll held dark energy. I wonder if it still haunts me. One day I saw a shadow person outside my window, a faceless black figure. After that, I spiraled into depression, hearing footsteps and voices. A curandera came, performed a ritual, and said my soul wasn't fully with me. Afterward, I finally slept soundly. The feeling of being watched faded. A few weeks ago, I had a hauntingly clear dream of a drowned body lying face down on rocks. The next day, a newspaper showed the body discovered nearby. The dream was so vivid, I felt a headache on my right side. I investigated, piecing together clues that suggested foul play. The body was identified as a missing student. I believe the spirit reached out to me. My toddler talks to someone unseen at night. The baby monitor caught a cheerful male voice saying, "Hey!" And later, my son said, "Tony," the name of his great-uncle who died before he was born. No one else is in the house. It's unsettling. One night, I heard a scream coming from my bathroom drain. It was a high-pitched, horrifying shriek unlike anything else. I froze, heart pounding. Then the noise stopped. The bathroom was empty. I never heard it again, but it haunts me still. On a camping trip in late autumn, a bright singing light lit up our hut as if day, then vanished suddenly. A hailstorm followed, with massive ice pellets pounding on the roof. I heard footsteps outside despite the storm's roar. It was terrifying and inexplicable. I've sleepwalked and seen demonic spirits. Once, in a midday nap, I felt fingers walking across my arm, but no one was there. I've heard my name called, seen shadow people, and had scratches appear on my body without cause. Once, I witnessed my spirit trying to return to my body after being chased by a dark entity in a shadowy dimension. These experiences have marked me forever. Since I was 14, I've battled sleep paralysis, being out of my body but held back by an evil force. Recently, I tried to wake myself using a protection prayer and felt something pulling me out sideways. It was terrifying, making me feel vulnerable and attacked. Our rental home is old, built before 1910, and neighbors who lived nearby were known to talk with harmless spirits. After their house was torn down, their ghosts seemed to visit our home temporarily, opening doors and making noises. My mom once smelled cigar smoke and felt a cold spot. We hope the new house built there is haunted too. In my family, spirits have been part of our lives for generations. My great-great-grandmother Grammy lived to 104, making her own wine and predicting the return of wolves. She and my great-grandmother claimed to talk with spirits. One night, I dreamed vividly of my dad rushing home, upset, to tell us Grammy had passed. The dream matched reality down to the minute. Later, a toy tractor rolled out of a dark basement, scaring me away. Years later, my great-grandfather whispered my name, even though he was too ill to speak clearly. That night, I dreamed of him telling me he was dying. The next day, he passed. My great-grandmother spoke of visiting friends unseen, and I once heard footsteps on empty stairs. These stories have shaped my understanding of the unseen world. Sometimes, the unexplainable touches our lives in ways we never expect. I hope sharing these tales gives you a glimpse into the mysteries that surround us, and maybe, just maybe, you'll believe in the whispers between worlds. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something that's been on my mind for a while. It's about this one time when I was working part-time as a custodian at a university building, and something really strange happened. Something I still can't wrap my head around, even though I'm not usually one to believe in the supernatural. So, pull up a chair and let me tell you what went down. This building wasn't on the main campus. It was about a mile away and used to be an old middle school before the university bought it. Now, it's where they run science labs and have some staff offices. Early mornings were usually my quiet time, you know? I'd be there all alone, just doing my routine cleaning before anyone else showed up. It was peaceful, kind of a nice break from the usual hustle and bustle. So, this one morning, I started my shift around 6 a.m. I came in, unlocked the door, and then locked it behind me. I was supposed to be the only person in the whole building until about 7:30 when the students and staff started rolling in. Everything was normal at first. I was moving through the rooms, checking off my list. Then I got to the women's restroom at the far end of the building. Now, this restroom is shaped kind of like a T. When you open the door, you can see the sinks straight ahead, but the stalls are tucked around the corner, out of sight. I didn't bother knocking. I figured, why would I? I was the only person there. But as I opened the door, I caught a glimpse of a woman standing with her back against the wall. Only half her body was visible because the other half was hidden behind the corner she was leaning on. I was caught off guard, honestly. I said, "Sorry, I didn't expect anyone to be here." She didn't say anything, just suddenly dashed around the corner and locked herself in the stall farthest from the entrance. I called out to her, trying to be polite, saying, "Hey, sorry if I scared you. I thought I was alone." But then, I heard pounding on the stall door, loud and frantic. My heart started racing. I closed the restroom door and blocked it with my cleaning cart, just in case. Then I grabbed my phone and called my supervisor, telling him there was a woman locked in the stall and I didn't know what was going on. About 10 minutes later, a couple of campus security officers arrived. They came with me back to the restroom, and we all heard this woman pacing inside the stall. We tried to reason with her, to get her to come out, but there was no response. Then, the officers said they'd open the door, and here's the kicker. When they opened the stall door, nobody was there, just empty air. We all just stood there, speechless, trying to process what we just saw. Later, they checked the security footage from the night before, looking for anyone who might have snuck in. There was no sign of anyone entering the building at all. I'm telling you, I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but this just doesn't make sense. I worked in that building dozens of times before and after that day, and nothing like this ever happened again. Sometimes, I wonder if there was some kind of glitch in reality, or maybe a trick of the light and sound. But deep down, I know what I saw. And it's a story I keep close, just in case you ever find yourself alone in an old school building early in the morning. You never know who or what might be there with you. Hey, I want to share a couple of stories with you. Some strange, some eerie, all unforgettable. These aren't just tales. They're moments that left a mark on the people who lived through them. Let me start with a story my uncle told me. A story that unfolded deep in the woods near our village. It was a quiet afternoon, not too hot or cold. A gentle breeze weaving through the leaves and rustling the branches just enough to bring the forest to life. The kind of day where nature hums softly, and you feel like you're part of something bigger. My uncle had gone out on a hunting trip, trekking about an hour into the thick forest that borders our home. The kind of place that feels untouched by time, where the air smells of earth and pine. But that day, he didn't come back with any game. Instead, something else caught his eye, something far more mysterious. Hours had stretched on, his patience tested by the endless wait and careful tracking. And then, through the underbrush, he spotted it. A creature unlike any he'd ever seen. It had antlers, yes, but it wasn't just a deer. No, this was something larger, towering, majestic, like a beast from a legend. He described it as being as big as a small cabin, with eyes like glossy black orbs, curious and unblinking. He raised his rifle, heart pounding, aiming to bring down this magnificent creature. But when he fired, the bullet passed right through it. No impact, no sound. The creature didn't flee wildly. Instead, it turned and walked calmly toward the village path, vanishing before his eyes into a clearing. No footprints, no blood, no trace at all. Just a silence that seemed to hum with otherworldly energy. In the clearing, my uncle found a small piece of the creature, something connected to its antlers. He took it home, unsure what he'd brought back. That night he dreamed, or maybe it was a nightmare. There was scratching at his door, a soft knock mingled with an eerie scrape. When he opened it, the creature stood right there, almost close enough to touch, its eyes filled with something gentle yet powerful. He woke up, startled but strangely calm, clutching his gun and machete, ready to confront whatever it was. But the neighbors saw him rushing out, furious and wild-eyed, and they were scared. Realizing this was no ordinary animal, but a spirit, my uncle sought out the local witch doctor. The old healer told him the spirit favored him, a guardian of sorts, leaving a gift so they could be connected. The witch doctor crafted the fragment into a charm, something my uncle could carry or hang in his home like a small shrine. At first, my uncle was terrified. He'd never dealt with anything supernatural before. But over time, the spirit soothed his fears and dreams, comforting him. Since that encounter, his life changed. Not rich or fancy, but peaceful, steady. He worked hard and was rewarded fairly, no longer the reckless bad boy my family remembered from his youth. That spirit, that guardian, had transformed him. I often wonder, was it an angel? A demon? A fallen angel, maybe, from the stories of Lucifer? Whatever it was, it never harmed him. And maybe, just maybe, it could watch over me too someday. When Judgment Day comes, I'd like to think that spirit will vouch for me, just as it did for my uncle. Now, on a different note, I want to tell you about a chilling experience from when I was a kid, about 7 or 8 years old. One night, I woke up thirsty as usual and headed to the kitchen. But something was off. The usual red light on the toaster was gone, replaced by the shadowy silhouette of my grandpa standing there. I called out to him softly, but no answer. My heart started racing as I slowly backed up toward the bathroom, where a nightlight cast a gentle glow. I called again, louder this time, and noticed another dark figure behind him. It was my brother. I called their names, but silence answered me. I was frozen with fear, like a deer caught in headlights, watching as their shadows glided silently into my mom's bedroom. It was terrifying. After a moment, I gathered all my courage, stepped into the room, and woke my mom. The room was empty, bathed only in the soft moonlight. The ghostly figures were gone. I told my mom what I'd seen, drank some water, definitely not going back to the kitchen that night, and went back to bed. Even though this memory is a bit hazy now, I know it was real. I've always had a good memory, and I've never had any signs of hallucinations or anything like that. Whatever I saw that night was real, and it still sends a shiver down my spine. And then there's the story about my house, our home, where the supernatural seems to linger. Since I can remember, strange things have happened. Every time we sage the house, the activity stops, but after about 6 months, it creeps back in. A year ago, I decided to test it. I didn't sage, and for a few weeks, it was the usual. Objects falling inexplicably, bangs on the walls, fleeting shadows, and that unsettling feeling of being watched. One day during a Zoom class, my dog, who'd been sleeping peacefully beside me, suddenly woke up furious. He stood in an attack stance, growling at the closed door. My brother was asleep in another room, and I was alone. Quietly, I grabbed a bat and slipped a knife into my pocket, creeping toward the door with my dog growling low. I cracked the door open, and my dog's head peeked out, scanning the living room and kitchen. No one was there, but his fur bristled, and his growls grew louder as he moved toward the back of the couch. I looked behind it. Nothing. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. That same day, hours later, I was playing guitar in my room. My long hair was tucked behind my right ear, and the left side wasn't near my hands or instrument. Suddenly, I felt like I was being watched. Then, I felt my hair lift, like a ghostly hand brushing through it. At first, I ignored it, but then it felt like someone yanked strands sharply. When I looked up, strands of hair floated in the air, drifting down like whispers. I froze, then decided enough was enough. When my mom and brother got home, I told her what happened. Later, she said she'd seen someone sitting in the dining room with long hair, someone who ignored her questions. She couldn't see clearly because of the shadows cast by the sun, so it looked like a dark figure. I searched the house. Empty. When my dad came home, we all agreed it was time to sage the house again. The activity stopped immediately, but it always seems to return about 6 months later. I remember one moment from when I was in 3rd grade. I came home early on a Wednesday. Mom was cooking. My brother was still at school. Dad was out of town. As I opened my bedroom door, the crucifix resting in the middle of a tall drawer suddenly floated right in front of me, suspended for what felt like 6 seconds before crashing to the floor, broken in two. I showed Mom, and though she was skeptical, she knew I couldn't have moved it. Over the years, she's felt tugging on her shirts and invisible hands on her shoulders when she's alone. Our family has all experienced things moving on their own, shadows flickering, and that constant sense of a presence. We don't know what it is, but it's part of our lives now. Sometimes I wonder if these encounters, my uncle's spirit, my childhood shadows, the restless energy in my home are all connected in some way. Maybe the unseen world is just a little closer than we think, whispering to us in moments of stillness and fear. Thanks for listening to these stories. They're a little piece of the strange and mysterious world we live in, and sharing them makes them feel a little less lonely. Hey there, thanks for sitting down with me. I want to share some stories, real ones, that have haunted me and others, not necessarily with terror, but with that eerie chill you get when the ordinary brushes against the unexplained. So, let's start with a story about shadows and silence. When I was around 8 or 9, I began seeing these strange figures, humanoid shadows, but not standing upright. They were always on all fours, moving silently in the corners of my eyes. It all started after a friend told me a spooky story, and at first, I thought it was just my young imagination running wild. But then, about 5 years ago, when I moved into my current house, things got a lot more intense. A few months after moving in, nightmares started creeping into my sleep, the kind that leave you gasping and shaking. Most of these dreams ended the same way. Everything would go pitch black, and I'd feel this crushing weight on my chest, like an invisible presence sitting right there, pressing down on me. That weight was suffocating, and it was the nightmare I had most often. One morning, around 6:30 a.m., I woke up thirsty and quietly opened my bedroom door to sneak downstairs for a glass of water. That's when I saw it, the shadow creature, right there on the stairs. It was crouched on all fours, limbs long and thin. I could make out the shape of a head, but there was no face, just dark emptiness where one should be. It stayed still for about 4 or 5 seconds, then just seemed to dissolve into the air, like smoke dispersing in a breeze. I don't really have the words for it. I've always been pretty skeptical about these things, thinking maybe it was just my mind still tangled in the nightmare's remnants. But then, the shadow kept appearing every few days, inching closer up the staircase with each sighting. Then came my 12th birthday party. Me and some friends decided to play that Charlie Charlie game. You know, that spooky pencil game from the internet? We started with the usual questions, and then I asked, half joking, "Are you here to harm us?" The pencil spun sharply to yes, and my friend M freaked out and quickly ended the game. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or curses, but I do wonder if not saying goodbye to whatever we summoned had consequences. Later that night, Em and I were lying in the living room, chatting quietly when the door slammed shut with a terrifying force. We both jumped, hearts racing. I checked all the windows, tightly closed. Going downstairs to investigate, I caught a glimpse of the shadow creature again, just for a split second before it vanished. I found out later that the kitchen window was slightly open, but the draft there couldn't have slammed the door shut that hard. So, no explanation. I'm not saying the game caused it, just that the timing was unsettling. Even now, at 16, the shadow still shows up sometimes. I have no idea what it is or why it's here, and I'm still wrestling with skepticism. But honestly, it's starting to feel less like my imagination and more like something real. Now, I want to tell you about another experience, this one from a friend of mine, Sarah. When she was about 5, she was at her cousin's house for Christmas, in the very house her mom grew up in. Sarah's mom had told her about strange things happening there before, so the setting was already a little eerie. All the kids were playing hide and seek, and Sarah decided to hide in one of the bedrooms. That's when she saw them. 3 tall, white, glowing figures standing silently near the closet, just watching her. They were shadows, but almost shimmering, like ghosts caught between worlds. Sarah ran out crying to her mom. Her mom still remembers that day vividly. Sarah never had a habit of imagining things, especially not with that kind of terror etched on her face. Later in life, when cleaning the kitchen, she encountered something else inexplicable. They had a painting that belonged to her grandfather, who had passed away when she was 6. It stood on a shelf above the kitchen dresser. As she vacuumed, she suddenly saw the painting fly off the shelf with surprising force, landing face up a good meter away. She tried putting it back, but it kept flipping face down, no matter how she positioned it. No windows were open, no drafts could explain it. And then, Sarah told me about a recurring nightmare where she'd be on the sofa watching TV when a black shadow would slowly float down the hallway toward her room. It would suddenly stop, turn to look at her, and then charge with a horrifying scream. The scene would flash red and black over and over until she woke up gasping, feeling like her own hands were choking her. Moving on, I recall a story from my old friend Jake, who's always been a night owl like me. One night, when he was about 14 or 15, he was in his bedroom reading some role-playing game book late into the night. His parents were asleep across the hall, and the house was silent except for the occasional creaks. Out of nowhere, Jake heard soft footsteps approaching his door. 3 slow, deliberate steps, each pressing lightly on the carpet. His whole body froze, every nerve tingling with fear as his breathing stopped. And then, he heard a high-pitched spinning sound, like a dentist's drill buzzing in the dark. It lasted just a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, silence. Jake switched off his lamp faster than ever before. To this day, he can't explain that sound or what it meant. Was it an auditory hallucination? Maybe, but he's never experienced anything like it before or since. Another friend, Mike, shared his experience from just after high school. He went to see a scary movie with his buddy and the buddy's girlfriend. Mike often played the role of the third wheel, especially for horror flicks, since he loved them and it meant free tickets and snacks. After the movie, at his friend's house, the girlfriend went to talk privately with her boyfriend before driving home. Mike waited inside, lights off, sprawled at the kitchen table. He nodded off and woke suddenly to his shoulder being shaken lightly, like a teacher waking a sleepy student. When he turned, no one was there, and the lights were still off. He spent the next 20 minutes in the living room with the TV and a lamp on until his friend finally came in. Mike's usually not the type to get spooked or believe in the paranormal, but that moment still haunts him because he can't explain it. Maybe the scary movie got under his skin more than he realized. Finally, there's a story from an older gentleman I met who's been investigating a local legend. It's about a young woman, 19 years old, who worked in a brothel back in 1889. The story goes she died by shooting herself in the head, but our investigator believes she was murdered by her husband, who had tried to abandon her in other cities before. He found her grave and started caring for it, cleaning and leaving offerings: red roses, bourbon, a cigar, apples, and a piece of white lace tied with a red twine. One hot day, while sitting by her grave, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He turned to see a crow in a tree nearby, bobbing its head and making strange chirps. Intrigued, he asked if it was trying to tell him something. Near the tree, he noticed another grave with his own surname, but no dates. After spending some time there, he said goodbye and left. As he walked home, he felt a gentle tug on his hand, like a soft invitation or a comforting presence. At home, odd things happened. The bathroom light suddenly burnt out, and when he passed his bedroom, he felt strange. Inside, his bed was neatly made, and his favorite shirt, the one he wore when visiting the grave, was folded perfectly on a chair. He never makes his bed or folds his clothes, so this was unusual but oddly comforting. Later, a crow appeared on his balcony, bobbing and chirping again, deepening the mystery. That night, he woke up to find a woman in a long dress standing beside his bed, gone in an instant. Then, in the living room, he saw her sitting silently at the table, stroking her long braid. Despite the chill, he didn't feel threatened. He believes that by tending her grave, he has made a friend of hers, a presence that sometimes watches over him quietly. All these stories, from shadow creatures on stairs to ghostly crows and unexplainable sounds, remind us that the world holds more mysteries than we often admit. Sometimes these experiences unsettle us, but sometimes they bring an unexpected comfort, a reminder that we might not be as alone as we think. Thanks for listening. I hope these tales give you a little shiver and maybe a sense of wonder too. Hey, I want to share a few eerie little stories that have stuck with me. Not because I'm a believer in all things paranormal, but because some moments just can't be easily explained. They made me pause and wonder, and I hope they'll intrigue you too. Let me begin with a trip my husband and I took to Santa Fe, New Mexico. We stayed in this really old hotel, the kind of place with those creaky wooden floors and a history that seeps into the walls. Normally, I'm pretty skeptical about ghosts and the supernatural, mostly because I've never had any personal experiences. But this stay was different. Our room had this antique wooden chair with a seat that slanted backward. I noticed because it was oddly perfect for what I did. I placed my laptop bag on it. I'm always super careful with my electronics, and the slant meant my bag would slide gently back, nestling securely against the chair's backrest, so there was no risk of it falling. I also hung a brand new dress I'd bought on the chair's back, thinking it would stay safe and wrinkle-free. We went out for the day, exploring and soaking in the sights, and when we returned, my dress was lying crumpled on the floor near the chair. At first, I thought maybe housekeeping had come in, but we'd put a big "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, and the room definitely hadn't been serviced. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Later that night, as my husband and I lay in bed talking quietly in the darkness, almost drifting off, a sudden, deafening slam shattered the silence. We both jumped awake, hearts pounding, and flicked on the light. To our disbelief, my laptop bag was sprawled on the floor, on the exact opposite side of the room, about 15 feet away from the chair it had been resting on. Now here's the thing. The chair seat slants backward toward the wall, so it would be nearly impossible for the bag to fall forward so far on its own, let alone make that thunderous noise hitting the floor. It was as if someone had snatched it up and thrown it across the room. I was honestly terrified. My husband, ever the pragmatist, just shrugged and said, "Looks like this place might be haunted, like a lot of spots around here. Maybe the ghost doesn't like stuff on its chair." I was too spooked to even check if my laptop survived until morning. That night, I insisted we keep a light on while we slept. The next day, my husband asked at the front desk if the hotel had any ghost stories. The clerk laughed and said, "Oh, you mean the little girl?" That cryptic answer left me with chills. Okay, switching gears a bit, here's something a little different. I've always been drawn to creepy stories and horror podcasts, and I'm the kind of person who doodles strange, eerie images without really thinking about it. Lately, I've been blasting spooky stories on YouTube, and I'm beginning to wonder if I might have accidentally invited some spirit into my home. Just this morning, I woke up and couldn't find my phone anywhere. I thought maybe I'd knocked it off the bed while sleeping, so I reached under, but it wasn't there. I looked all around, and strangely, I wasn't even that worried about losing the phone. I was more concerned that my alarm wouldn't go off. Eventually, I found it, neatly placed next to my pillow on the opposite side from where my charger usually is. The weird part? The battery was much fuller than when I went to bed, so it definitely had been charging. As I was texting a friend about this oddity, the LED light on my desk suddenly flickered on by itself, a bright, steady blue glow. My remote was right there on the desk, untouched. I tried turning the light off with the remote, but it wouldn't respond immediately. Instead, it slowly faded away on its own. It was strange, but I wasn't scared, more curious. One thing that really got to me was realizing my mind instinctively imagined something lurking under my bed, which is totally unlike me. I never get paranoid, even when listening to spooky stories late at night. But this time, I felt compelled to take down one specific drawing I'd made. It's like something was trying to communicate. I wonder if the color blue means something, some kind of message from whoever or whatever might be around. If you have any thoughts or advice, I'd really appreciate it. And finally, I have a story from middle school that still gives me goosebumps. It was a dark and stormy day, really pouring outside, and the kind of weather that makes the house feel cozy, but also a little eerie. I was home alone for a bit, waiting for my parents to come back. I let our dog out and back in, grabbed a snack, and turned on the TV in the living room. That day, my dad was actually the first to get home. He'd been in court all day downtown and was wearing one of his long raincoats, the kind that reminded me of the Detective Columbo's style. He hung it in the front hall closet, which was in this odd spot just to the left of the front door, a door we hardly ever used, preferring the side entrance. The closet was mostly for long coats and winter gear. Here's the setup. Our big German Shepherd would greet anyone coming through the side door, so my dad always used that entrance. I was in the living room, which faces the front door and the closet, so I had a perfect view of both. As my dad opened the closet door to hang up his coat, we were chatting about our days. Then, just as he closed the door, we both saw something that stopped us cold. A black figure, looking like a cat or maybe a shadow of one, dashed silently across the hallway toward the kitchen. It was so fast, it vanished almost as soon as it appeared. We stared at each other, stunned. "Did you see that? What was that?" we said almost in unison. It moved exactly like a cat would, but here's the kicker. We didn't own a cat. We're all allergic, so we never had one. Plus, that closet was rarely opened, so if a cat had gotten in there, it probably wouldn't have survived long without food or water. We checked the whole house, and there was no sign of any feline intruder. Our German Shepherd would have gone crazy if she sensed a cat or strange animal in the house, and she was very protective. She barked at neighborhood cats all the time but never harmed them. Yet that day, she was calm, indicating no unfamiliar animal was inside. The figure was definitely cat-shaped, but too quick and shadowy to make out any details. Even my dad, who's usually skeptical about this kind of stuff, couldn't explain it. To this day, we still talk about that moment, trying to make sense of what we saw. It was one of those strange, unexplainable events that just stays with you. So, there you have it. 3 little slices of the uncanny. I'm still not sure what to believe, but these experiences have definitely made me more open to the idea that sometimes the world has mysteries we just can't explain. Thanks for listening to my stories. I'd love to hear if anything like this has ever happened to you. I'll try to explain this as simply and honestly as I can. I've been going through a really difficult stretch lately. I started relying too heavily on edibles, mostly because I wanted to shut off my feelings for a while. I was constantly irritable, snapping at people who didn't deserve it, and letting my thoughts drift into some frightening places. I'd also been stress eating, even though I've been trying hard to take better care of my health. Basically, I haven't felt like myself. A couple of nights ago, I was sick, exhausted, and still a little high. Something hesitated me, and my thoughts began spiraling. The more I focused on it, the worse everything became. My heart was pounding, my breathing felt shallow, and I couldn't seem to calm down. But somewhere in the middle of all that panic, I felt something change. I know this might sound strange. Maybe it was my own conscience finally breaking through. Maybe my mind was affected by the edible and the fever. But it genuinely felt as though my mom, and perhaps my uncle too, were there with me. The clearest message I felt was from my mom. It was almost as though she was telling me, firmly but lovingly, that I needed to stop doing this to myself. That I needed to quit using edibles to hide from my grief, I lost someone very close to me a little over a year ago, and since then, I've been trying to numb the pain instead of facing it. But the truth is, getting high never made the grief disappear. It just buried it for a few hours and left me feeling even worse afterward. For some reason, that night made me understand that. The next morning, I threw away everything I had left. I don't plan on touching it again for a long time. Maybe never. Since then, I've had this powerful feeling that I should stop fighting every painful part of life and simply allow myself to move through it. Not because the pain doesn't matter, but because I believe I can survive it without constantly running away. It felt like waking up after being trapped in a nightmare. During that experience, I remember asking my relatives to speak to God, the universe, or whoever might be listening. I've never considered myself especially religious. I've always believed there could be something after death, but I've never known exactly what I believe about God. Nothing dramatic happened. No objects moved, no lights flickered. There wasn't some unmistakable supernatural sign. But honestly, that wouldn't have been my mom's way. She knew how easily I could become frightened. If she wanted to reach me, I think she would have done it quietly, through a feeling I couldn't ignore. Part of me still wants another sign. Something that would prove I wasn't imagining it and that someone really was looking out for me. At the same time, I know I shouldn't chase that feeling. Whether the experience was spiritual, psychological, or caused by being sick and high, it showed me that I need to change. I don't want to keep taking so much that I lose touch with reality. I don't want to destroy myself while waiting for proof that I'm loved. I miss my mom more than I can explain. I miss my uncle too. For a long time, I've been quietly begging for something to push me back toward the life I once wanted, toward my dreams and the person I hoped I could become. Right now, I'm in a better place. The thought that they may have visited me brings me comfort, even if I can't prove it. My biggest fear is that the darkness will return and I'll fall back into the same habits. I don't want to disappoint the people I've lost. But I also know I'm human, and I've been struggling for a long time. Maybe the message wasn't that I have to become perfect overnight. Maybe it was simply this: stop hurting yourself. Let people help you. Feel what you need to feel. Keep going. And for now, I think that's enough of a sign for me. Okay, this is a long one, so get comfortable. For a little context, I'm 24 and I've had strange paranormal experiences on and off since I was a teenager. Most of them were unsettling in the moment, but eventually I could explain them away or at least make peace with them. This experience was different. It happened about 5 months ago when I went home to spend a spring holiday with my family. I was staying at my mother's apartment for a few nights. My mom is in her early 50s, and for years she's been interested in different spiritual practices. She's attended workshops, taken courses, and studied under several spiritual teachers. That detail becomes important later. One evening, at around 10:30, I was lying on the bed in her spare room. My mom was still awake in the living room, answering emails on her laptop. I must have drifted off without realizing it, because suddenly, I was having one of the most vivid dreams I've ever experienced. In the dream, my mom and I were walking toward this enormous old building. We were going there to visit someone, although no one ever clearly said his name. Still, I somehow knew it was one of her spiritual instructors, a man I had briefly met at one of her events. I can still remember the building in ridiculous detail. It stood in the middle of a large park filled with tall trees. Facing away from the entrance, I could see a long row of trees stretching across the grounds in an almost perfectly straight line. The building itself was pale, wide, and several stories high. There were 2 narrow trees on either side of the main doorway, almost framing it. When we entered, We climbed a broad spiral staircase. The inside felt formal and echoing, and I had the strong impression that the building had once been a gallery or a museum. There was a large group of people with us, all waiting to see this man. Most of them were women, many older than my mother, although there were a handful of younger women around my age. Eventually, a woman who seemed to be his assistant led us into a waiting room. That was when everything changed. I suddenly felt terrified. There was no obvious reason for it, but every instinct in me was screaming that I had to get my mother out of that building. I kept telling her we needed to leave immediately, but she reacted. She just sat there calmly, as though she couldn't hear the urgency in my voice. Then the lights went out. A few seconds later, the assistant rushed into the room and told everyone there was a fire somewhere in the building. We needed to evacuate. We hurried back down the spiral staircase and made it outside safely. Once we were in the park, I started searching through the crowd, although I didn't know what I was looking for. Then, I saw her. A young woman with deep copper-red hair was standing beside a man who appeared to be her boyfriend. She was holding his hand tightly. I remember her dark green jacket, the silver rings on her fingers, the shape of her eyeliner, even the small black bag hanging from her shoulder. It sounds strange, but I felt as though every detail about her had been deliberately shown to me. Something about her was important. I just didn't know why. The moment I realized that, I woke up. The first thing I saw was a figure standing beside the bed. I don't really know how to describe it. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't invisible either. It looked a little like the air above a hot road in summer, when the heat bends and distorts everything behind it. There was a vaguely human outline, but whenever I tried to focus on its face or body, the details seemed to slip away. I was startled and tried to push myself upright. I didn't get the chance. In less than a second, the figure leaned over, grabbed me by both shoulders, forced me back against the mattress, and began shaking me. Then it spoke. The voice didn't sound clearly male or female. It was strained, almost broken, and it repeated the same word over and over. Rape, rape, rape. Again and again. Then, without warning, it stopped. The figure disappeared. I lay there completely frozen. The strangest part was that I didn't feel as though it had wanted to hurt me. I was shocked, obviously, and the experience had been incredibly invasive, but the presence itself didn't feel cruel. It felt desperate. It felt like someone trying to deliver a warning and believing they only had a few seconds to do it. The light in the hallway was still on, so I got out of bed and went straight to my mother. It was close to midnight by then, and she was still sitting in the living room. I told her everything. I explained the dream, the building, the crowd of women, the fire, the red-haired girl, and the figure beside the bed. Then I told her what my instincts were saying. I believed the warning was about her spiritual teacher. More specifically, I believed he had sexually assaulted several of his female students. My mother was stunned. She started asking me questions about the building, so I asked where this man held his seminars. She told me his classes took place in a large cultural center that had once been a museum. It was located inside a park, surrounded by trees. At that point, I asked her to show me photographs. When she pulled them up, I felt sick. It was the same building from my dream. The entrance was identical. The two trees stood on either side of the doorway. Inside was the same curved staircase. Even the row of trees across the park matched what I had seen. I had never been there before. As far as I knew, I had never even seen a photograph of it. My mother and I talked for a long time, but neither of us knew what to do with the information. Eventually, I went back to the spare room and stayed awake for most of the night, replaying every detail. Over the next few days, I told two close friends what had happened. They were deeply unsettled, but we all reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. I couldn't accuse someone of a serious crime based only on a dream and a paranormal encounter. Even though my instincts kept telling me the warning was real, I had no proof. After the holiday, I returned to my university apartment and tried to put the whole experience behind me. Then, about a week later, one of the friends I had told sent me a video on social media. A local journalist was discussing an open investigation into the same spiritual teacher. Several women had come forward accusing him of sexual assault and coercion. Every woman mentioned in the report had attended his classes or private sessions. I remember staring at my phone, unable to move. Then I found the news articles. When I read the victims' statements, my stomach dropped. Their stories were disturbingly similar, and some of the incidents had reportedly taken place inside the building I saw in my dream. I still don't know exactly what happened to me that night. I don't know who or what the figure beside my bed was. I don't know whether the red-haired woman was one of the victims, someone connected to the investigation, or simply a symbol my mind created. The investigation is still unresolved, and in the country where this happened, powerful people often avoid consequences. I sincerely hope that isn't what happens here. More than anything, my heart goes out to the women who came forward. Whatever the final outcome may be, their decision to speak publicly has already warned others and may have prevented more people from being harmed. I'm still left with a lot of questions, but I no longer believe the dream was random. I think someone was trying to make me listen. Let me tell you about the strangest week I have ever experienced at school. There is almost always something happening in our section. Someone faints, somebody says they heard whispering near their ear, or a classmate suddenly feels physically or emotionally unwell. Our school buildings were also used during the Second World War, which only adds another layer to all the stories people tell about the place. Unusual things had happened before, but this school year felt different. Our academic classes were scheduled mostly in the afternoon, and one of my closest classroom friends started noticing that several students seemed unusually weak or exhausted during those hours. It began on July 21st. During science class, our teacher, who is deeply religious, suddenly stopped in front of my classmate, whom I'll call Kay. She stared into Kay's eyes, placed a hand on her forehead, and quietly began praying. Then she stepped away and continued teaching, as though nothing had happened. I remember sitting there thinking, what just happened? A little later, the teacher asked Kay to stand. "Everyone, look at her eyes," she said. "This is really her." I had no idea what she meant. Kay eventually sat down, and for a while everything returned to normal. But during social studies, the whole room began to feel restless. It was not especially loud, yet people kept turning their heads. Some students pulled out small prayer books and Bibles. There was a strange tension in the air, as though everyone knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to say it. A few minutes into the lesson, Kay returned to the room, crying, accompanied by another student. After that, everything became a blur. People started praying the Hail Mary. I'm agnostic, but I joined them because I was frightened and didn't know what else to do. I covered my ears, and my friend stayed close beside me. When the prayers seemed to quiet down, my friend whispered, "Don't look into Kay's eyes." I wish I had listened. Kay was sitting near the front. When I looked up, she was staring across the classroom with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was so intense and unfamiliar that the image stayed with me long after I went home. My friend and I moved to the back of the room, and I started crying. Our advisor eventually arrived and began speaking firmly, saying things like, I command whatever is troubling you to leave." I don't clearly remember everything that happened next. I think Kay ran out of the classroom. Panic spread quickly, and several students, including me, became overwhelmed. Later, my friend told me that another classmate, whom I'll call Quinn, had heard Kay repeatedly saying, "The tree in Offie, the tree in Offie." Offie is a small park inside our school grounds. There are several old trees there, and students have passed around stories claiming that one of them is haunted. That evening, the parents' group chat became chaotic. One message especially frightened me. A parent said her daughter, whom I'll call Leah, had been hearing the voices of 3 men and 1 woman. According to the message, the voices threatened to hurt her and take her away. Leah had already been brought to the emergency room. The next morning, Kay returned to school cheerful and completely normal. Seeing her smiling and talking with everyone was, honestly, a relief. But in the afternoon, it happened again. Our values education teacher had not arrived yet, so some students began praying. Eventually, the head of the English department came by to check whether a teacher was present. When our values teacher finally entered, she looked close to tears. She approached Kay gently, almost like a worried mother. "Kay, are you okay? Let's go to the clinic." Kay refused. "Please, come with me," the teacher said. When Kay still would not move, the teacher became desperate and said, "I will fail you in values education if you don't come with me right now." It was such an unexpected thing to say that, even though the situation was frightening, some of us almost laughed from sheer nervousness. The teacher asked several boys to bring the school medic and a stretcher. The stretcher was never really used because the teacher and the medic eventually had to guide Kay out themselves. Not long afterward, we heard screaming and crying from somewhere outside the classroom. Teachers gathered around Kay and prayed the rosary with her. The following day, Kay did not attend school. Our advisor had advised her parents to let her rest at home. A few days later, she returned. At first, I genuinely believed things were getting better. Then everything became worse. This time, Leah was nearby. She approached Kay and asked, "Hey, are you okay?" After a while, Kay began focusing on Leah in a way that made the people around them uncomfortable. During values class, Leah went close to her again and spoke to her as though nothing was wrong. At that moment, I was less afraid because I had started wondering whether Kay might be experiencing a serious health condition rather than anything supernatural. Then Kay smiled at Leah. It was a strange, stretched smile that did not feel like her usual expression. Kay lifted one hand and gestured for Leah to come closer. And Leah listened. Several classmates immediately pulled Leah away. Kay became furious and grabbed at a chair as though she might throw it. That was the moment my confidence disappeared. I no longer knew what explanation made sense. During English, our final class of the day, Kay and Leah were assigned as partners for an activity. For a while, Kay seemed completely fine again. But throughout that afternoon, she had several more episodes. Each time, teachers and students prayed until she appeared to calm down and recognize everyone again. Something else happened while I was busy working with my partner. I did not see it clearly, but I was told that Kay tried to approach Leah again and had to be led away. That is where the story ends for now. A pastor eventually came to pray over our classroom and the students. Some of us joked that we needed a priest walking around with an entire bucket of holy water, but beneath the jokes, everyone was genuinely worried. Our advisor and our parents are concerned about us. I don't know what happens to Kay when she is at home, and I don't know whether she has received medical or psychological support. The strangest part is that these episodes seem to happen only in the afternoon. And the classroom where all of this took place? It is the same classroom we used last year.
Hey, I
want to share this experience I had while staying at this charming old place called O'Gorman House in Kilkenny, Ireland. I was there for 9 days, and honestly, it's a beautiful spot. Right in the heart of the city, close to everything, with a cozy room and a genuinely friendly owner. But, and here's the kicker, this place is haunted. Yep, haunted. So, picture this. It's early Sunday morning, about 3:30 a.m. I get up, like you do, to use the bathroom. I'm half asleep, wandering back to bed when I start hearing noises outside in the hallway. But it's not footsteps. No, it's more like things shifting or moving around. Quiet, but definitely there. Then, out of nowhere, the tap in the hallway turns on and off by itself. I swear I counted exactly 10 knocks on the wall, just random, but clear. Then, faint sounds come from downstairs near the bar area. Now, these stairs are old and creaky. If anyone was coming up or down, I'd hear every step. But nope, nothing but those strange sounds. And then, just as mysteriously as it started, around 4 a.m., everything went silent. I didn't dare go check it out because honestly, I'm not about to mess with whatever was there. Plus, the only other person upstairs with me was fast asleep, snoring away, completely oblivious. For the next few days, nothing happened. It was quiet. But then, Friday morning, same time, 3:30 a.m., I get up again. I'm trying to fall back asleep when I hear a door down the hallway unlock and open all by itself. The other person upstairs? Still snoring. Then I hear things being moved around, again, no footsteps. And then, I hear an older woman softly calling out, "Hello, hello." It's eerie, but she wasn't loud or angry, more like curious, maybe? The noises downstairs start up again, and the door down the hall opens and closes on its own. Again, I stayed put, didn't investigate. I figured if this ghost or spirit wanted to leave me alone, I'd respect that. I'm just a visitor here after all. Kilkenny has this reputation as one of the most haunted cities around, which I always thought was a bit of folklore, but now, I'm not so sure. It's a lovely place, and honestly, I was even thinking about moving there. But after this experience, I'm just glad whatever it was left me be. Now, I dare any skeptic or someone who doesn't believe in this stuff to spend a week at O'Gorman House. Come back and tell me what you think, because for me, it was real, it was unexpected, and it definitely left an impression. Just remember, some things you might not want to poke at. Sometimes, it's better to let the past rest quietly. Okay, so let me give you a little context first. I'm from Georgia, and last fall I spent a week near the Blue Ridge Mountains with my dad and my friend, Mara. We rented this old cabin just outside a tiny mountain town. It wasn't completely isolated, but once you stepped onto the property, all you could see were trees. No neighboring houses, no streetlights, nothing. The cabin itself was built sometime in the 1860s. It had uneven floors, narrow hallways, and those thin wooden walls that let you hear almost everything happening in the next room. This all started at around 1 in the morning. My dad had already gone to sleep in the downstairs bedroom. Mara was taking a shower in the bathroom down the hall, and I was upstairs in our room, lying in bed and scrolling through my phone. Then Mara called me. She didn't explain anything. She just whispered, "Can you come down here?" The second I reached the bathroom, I could tell something was wrong. She was standing there wrapped in a towel holding her phone. Instead of speaking, she opened her notes app and started typing. She told me that while she was showering, someone had knocked directly on the bathroom door. First, there was one knock. A few seconds later, 2 more. Then, after another pause, one final knock. And these weren't the usual creaks and pops you hear in an old wooden house. Mara was completely certain that someone had been knocking. At first, she assumed it was me trying to scare her. She opened the shower curtain and called my name, but nobody answered. Eventually, she convinced herself that she had imagined it and went back to showering. A few moments later, something slammed against the metal trash can beside the sink and bounced onto the floor. She said it sounded heavy. The noise was so clear that she immediately pulled the curtain open, expecting to see something lying there. But the floor was empty. The only object close enough to fall was a glass of water sitting on the counter with her retainer beside it. Both were still exactly where she had left them. That was when she called me. I stayed inside the bathroom until she finished getting dressed. Nothing else happened while I was there, so we tried to tell ourselves that maybe the cabin was settling or the pipes were making strange noises. When we returned upstairs, though, the room felt different. I should probably mention that I've seen unusual things since I was a kid. You can believe that or not, and honestly, I understand either way. I've just always been sensitive to certain places. That night, I could see two figures moving around our bedroom. One looked almost human, tall, thin, and pale, but without any clear features. It remained near Mara's side of the room. The other was darker and harder to describe. I couldn't make out a body or a face. It was more like a shape that kept shifting near my side of the room. They never came close to us. They just moved back and forth, each staying in its own half of the room. I didn't tell Mara what I was seeing. She was already frightened enough, and I knew acknowledging them would only make everything feel more real. We sat quietly for a while, trying to process what had happened in the bathroom. Then we heard movement downstairs. It sounded like someone was walking around the kitchen. There were slow footsteps, the scrape of a chair, and the sound of objects being shifted across the counter. I told Mara it was probably my dad getting a glass of water, but she still looked uneasy. So I called out, "Dad?" From downstairs, he answered, "Yeah?" That made us feel a little better. We assumed he had been the one making the noise, and eventually, we went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up at around 8:15. Mara was still asleep beside me, so I stayed in bed and checked my phone. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps moving around in my dad's bedroom directly below ours. Because the floors were so thin, I could hear every slow shuffle. Then there was a massive bang. It sounded like someone had fallen face first onto the floor. My dad had hurt his hip earlier that week and was having trouble walking, so I immediately thought he had collapsed. I shouted for him, but there was no response. I jumped out of bed, accidentally waking Mara, and ran downstairs. I pushed open my dad's bedroom door. He was lying on the bed. His eyes were closed. He looked completely asleep. I stood there for a moment, confused, but he seemed fine. I went back upstairs and told Mara what had happened. Neither of us knew what to make of it, so we stayed in bed for a little while before finally going downstairs for breakfast. By the time we reached the kitchen, my dad was already dressed and making coffee. We told him everything, starting with the knocking in the bathroom and ending with the loud bang that morning. That was when things became much harder to explain. My dad said that when we called out to him during the night, he had been asleep in his bedroom. My voice woke him, which was why he answered, but he had never left his bed. He hadn't gone into the kitchen. He hadn't moved any chairs. He hadn't touched anything downstairs. Then I asked him about the bang I had heard that morning. He looked confused and told me that he had gotten up just before 8 and gone straight into the shower. He had stayed in the bathroom for nearly an hour before heading into the kitchen. According to him, he wasn't in his bedroom when I ran downstairs. But I saw him there. I saw him lying on the bed with his eyes closed. And what still bothers me most is that I never heard the shower running. I never heard the bathroom door open. I only heard footsteps beneath me, followed by that horrible bang. I checked the time afterward because I wanted to make sure I hadn't been half asleep or confused. My alarm had gone off at 8:15, I know what time it was. I know which room I entered. And I know what I saw lying in my dad's bed. I need to tell you about my brother, Rowan. When we were little, we were close. We played together, talked like siblings do, and for a while, I really thought we would always have that bond. But somewhere around the time he turned 11 or 12, something in him started changing. It felt like he kept choosing the wrong road over and over again, until one day he was so far down it that none of us could reach him. He got into drugs young, and I don't mean that casually. Drugs became part of who he was, part of the way he saw himself. He started acting like people should be afraid of him, like being unstable made him powerful somehow. But to me, he wasn't scary in the way he wanted to be. He was frightening because he was unpredictable, because he could be cruel, because there was always this shadow hanging around him. And the strange thing is, our house already had shadows of its own. My childhood bedroom had actually been his room first. He asked to switch with me, and at the time, I was excited. His room was larger, and it had this wide view out toward the back of the property. I thought I was getting lucky. He never warned me. He never told me about the growling that seemed to come from nowhere, or the sharp shushing sounds in the dark, or the whistling, the footsteps, the tapping on the window when no one was outside. He never mentioned the knocking inside the walls, or the occasional rotten sulfur smell that would drift through the room and disappear just as suddenly. He didn't tell me that sometimes things would fly off shelves like an invisible hand had swept them away. I had to learn all of that on my own. And while I never touched drugs myself, my siblings and I all experienced things in that house that felt deeply wrong, heavy, angry, not just eerie but hostile. Rowan used to say those things attacked him mentally. He said they got inside his head, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of that. Maybe it was the drugs. Maybe it was real. Maybe the addiction made him easier for something dark to latch onto. I don't know. I only know that he became worse as the years went on. He stole. He lied. He hurt me more times than I can count. He choked me, slapped me, shoved me into walls. I told my parents again and again, but because they never saw it happen, it was brushed off as sibling conflict. Just fighting. Just drama. But I knew it wasn't that. I told them he was going to do something that couldn't be undone. I told them he needed serious help. The kind where someone steps in and keeps him somewhere safe, somewhere supervised. I said it so many times that eventually I started feeling like a broken alarm no one wanted to hear. My parents had their own pain between them. My dad was strict, and my mom was softer in ways that sometimes made things harder. Rowan hated my dad for trying to set boundaries. He spent years painting him as the enemy. My parents never really wanted to divorce, but they stopped living like a married couple. We had a real barn on the back of our property, and my dad had already turned one of the stalls into an office. When things got too tense in the house, he fixed it up more and started sleeping out there, almost like a small studio apartment. By then, I had moved out with the man who is now my husband. Then one night, Rowan was drunk, and probably on something else too. He wrote a letter explaining what he was going to do. Then he took several knives from the kitchen, walked out to the barn, and went into my dad's room. He stabbed him 28 times. That's what the coroner said. Afterward, he went back into the house and woke my sister. He asked her to give him 5 minutes before calling 911. He honestly thought she would let him run, standing there covered in blood. She and her boyfriend ran out to my dad, but it was already too late. There are no words big enough for what that kind of loss does to a family. Grief is one thing, rage is another, but there's also this awful confusion that never really leaves. We were raised in the same home. We were given love, care, food, shelter, chances, support. My parents tried so hard to help him get sober. My siblings tried too. It just never stayed. And sometimes I still wonder whether growing up surrounded by whatever lived in that house did something to him. I wonder if all that malevolent energy, mixed with addiction and anger and untreated illness, helped twist him into someone capable of doing something so monstrous. I want to be very clear. I do not think he is blameless. I do not think spirits made him do it. He made choices. He caused harm. He took my father from us. But sometimes, late at night, when my mind goes back to that room he gave me, to the growling and the knocking and the smell of sulfur in the air, I wonder if there was more feeding that darkness than we ever understood. I've had strange things happen around me for as long as I can remember. Most of the time, I can explain them away. A voice in an empty room becomes my imagination. Thinking about someone I haven't seen in years, only for them to text me later that day, becomes coincidence. Little things like that. But there have been a few moments I couldn't tuck neatly into a drawer and forget about. One of them happened years ago when I worked security at an old school in New England. I heard things there. I saw things there. Things I still don't like talking about too casually, because once you say them out loud, they feel alive again. So naturally, after telling myself I didn't need any more of that in my life, I somehow agreed to go on a ghost tour in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. My father, Martin, had wanted to take a trip for a while. He's getting older, and there were a couple of places he really wanted us to see together: Gettysburg and Washington, D.C. I'd never been to either. When I was in 8th grade, my school went to Boston instead of D.C., so this whole trip had that feeling of catching up with a chapter I'd somehow skipped. We got to Gettysburg late in the afternoon, tired from a long drive and ready to disappear into the hotel for a bit. I thought that was the plan for the night too. Rest, maybe grab food, maybe wander around town. Then my dad casually mentioned he'd booked us a ghost tour. I figured it would be one of those nighttime walking tours where someone tells you stories, points at old buildings, and everyone takes blurry photos of windows. That sounded fine. A little spooky, but manageable. What he did not mention was that this tour involved actual ghost hunting equipment. Spirit boxes, EMF meters, REM pods, a music box thing that looked innocent enough, which honestly made it more unsettling. All the little electronic toys people use when they're trying to invite the dark to speak. At the start of the tour, our guide told us we'd be visiting 3 places: an old bridge near the site of a burned house, a covered bridge by the water, and then a park farther out. I remember standing there, listening to her explain the equipment and thinking, well, this is already a little more than I signed up for. Still, I told myself it would probably be quiet. Maybe a few random radio sounds. Maybe nothing at all. Our first stop was the bridge, near where the house had burned down. It was dark enough that the river below was mostly just a black ribbon moving under us. The guide told us some of the history. I wish I could say I absorbed every word, but after 7 hours in a car, my brain was more mashed potato than memory. What stuck with me was that a woman had died in the fire, and the area had been connected to the battle. The guide set out some equipment, and I started with an EMF meter. Nothing happened for a few minutes, so I switched to a spirit box. That's when things began to change. At first, it was mostly noise. Static, clipped syllables, strange little bursts of sound. I couldn't make out much, so I started asking yes or no questions. Are you stuck here? A response came through. Were you a soldier? Another response. Are you the woman from the fire? Nothing. Are you missing something? This time, there was a clear enough answer that I kept going. After a few more questions, it seemed like whoever was responding was trying to say they were missing a leg. That made the air feel heavier. I asked, "Do you know you're dead?" Nothing. "Do you miss your family?" Nothing again. The guide was standing near me by then, watching the equipment like she couldn't quite believe it. She said it usually wasn't this active. Maybe she says that to everyone. Maybe she doesn't. I honestly don't know. But the way she looked at the devices made me think she was genuinely surprised. Then I made a joke. I really wish I hadn't. I said something like, "Of course the guy who had a paranormal experience at an old New England school would attract spirits here." The moment I said that, the spirit box erupted. Not just a little, it went wild, and for the first and only time that night, the EMF meter reacted too. I stopped talking immediately. I stood there replaying my own words in my head, trying to figure out what I'd said that could have caused such a sharp reaction. Then it clicked. New England. That was the thing. So I started asking, "Are you from New England?" A response. "Massachusetts?" Nothing. "New Hampshire?" Nothing. "Maine?" Nothing. "Rhode Island?" Response. That one landed differently. I asked if they still had family there. Response. I asked if they missed it. Response. I asked if it was beautiful there, and when the box answered again, I almost laughed despite myself, because yes, Rhode Island really is beautiful. The old houses, the coast, the mansions, all of it. I asked if they wanted to go home. Another response. We kept going like that for a few minutes before the guide said we had to move to the next location. When we turned everything off and packed up, I realized the night was not going to be the harmless little spooky walk I had imagined. Funny enough, that first stop ended up being the calmest part of the night. It was also my favorite, maybe because it felt less threatening and more sad. Like someone had been waiting a very long time to be asked the right question. The second stop was the covered bridge. The guide told us it had been moved during a flood years ago, and that a little girl had drowned in the river nearby. There was also some story about an aunt who had been watching her, though nobody seemed to know whether it was a terrible accident or something darker. At first, not much happened there for me. A few spirit box hits, some faint responses. I thought I might have been communicating with the little girl for a short time, but it was hard to tell. Then I walked away from the bridge. A few people from outside our tour group had started following along near me. Not in a creepy way, just curious. They could tell something had been happening with the equipment, so they sort of drifted with me as I moved down along the river, farther from the lights, into a darker stretch of the area. That was when I started feeling sick. Not nervous, not uneasy. Sick. My stomach turned hard, like my body had suddenly decided it wanted no part of being there. I felt like I might throw up. The spirit box was still making noise, still giving responses, but everything felt wrong now. The air felt wrong. The dark felt too close. And it wasn't just me. The other people near me started saying they felt strange too. One of them said they saw movement out in the darkness, and that was enough for all of us. We turned around and went back to the bridge. I sat down and tried to breathe through it while the feeling slowly passed. Then someone using an EVP device said they had picked up words near me. Evil. Bad. A few others in that same lovely little family of words. That was a charming thought, let me tell you. Something dark hanging around me and making me nauseous. Absolutely delightful. 10 out of 10, would not recommend. My dad noticed I wasn't doing well and came over to check on me. He'd been wandering around with an EMF meter, trying to get responses of his own. He had gotten a few hits here and there, but once he saw me sitting there looking like my soul had stepped out for air, he shifted into dad mode pretty quickly. Thankfully, the sick feeling passed. Then we went to the final location. The park. We had been driving between locations because they were spread out, and by the time we got there, the night felt deeper somehow. Quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but occupied. And because apparently I had learned nothing, I picked up the spirit box again. I walked a little away from the group and started getting responses almost immediately. From what I could tell, there were 3 different presences there. I know how that sounds. I know. But that's what it felt like through the pattern of responses. They seemed to be guiding me. Left. Right. Keep going. At one point, I asked which way I should go, and the answer that came through was clear enough to make my skin tighten. Left. So I went left, then farther still. Eventually, I realized I had gotten too far from the group for my own comfort. The others were behind me, their voices faint, their flashlights small. I suddenly had this very practical, very human thought. I do not want to be out here by myself, in the dark, following voices through a radio. So I asked if I could go back. The response was not permission. That bothered me. I took a few more steps, then asked again. This time, the answer changed. It felt like I was allowed to return. I don't know how else to explain that without sounding ridiculous, but that is exactly how it felt. Like asking permission from something I could not see, and waiting to find out whether it would let me leave. I made my way back to the group. By then, my dad's back was hurting, and I could tell he was ready to be done. Honestly, so was I. The spirit box was still active, but most of it was impossible to understand. The guide helped me wrap things up properly, including telling whatever was there not to follow me. I was very happy to let her handle that part. After that, we went back to the hotel. Nothing else happened while we were in Gettysburg. No shadows in the room, no voices in the hallway, no dramatic final scare waiting by the bed. Just quiet. But the tour stayed with me. I had expected a walk in the dark and a few ghost stories. I had not expected equipment. I had not expected direct responses. I definitely had not expected to feel physically sick near that bridge, or to be led away from a group in a park by voices coming through static. My dad didn't experience as much as I did, though he did get EMF hits a few times. Mostly, I'm glad he had fun. He was glad I had fun too, although I think we both could have done without the part where I looked like I might collapse into the grass and become a cautionary tale. After a couple more days in Gettysburg, we left for Washington, D.C., and honestly, I hope that is the last time I deal with ghosts for a while. People romanticize hauntings. We turn them into movies, games, tours, jokes, stories told with a flashlight under the chin. And I get it. There is something fascinating about the idea that the dead might still be reaching toward us. But when you are standing in the dark and something answers you, it doesn't feel romantic. It feels ancient. It feels close. And it feels like a door you should be very careful about opening. Hey, I want to share something pretty intense that happened to my partner and me. We recently moved into a new apartment, hoping to leave behind the weird stuff that haunted our last place. This new condo is pretty nice, just a year old, tucked away in a quiet part of town, surrounded by woods and trails. We're on the top floor with no neighbors next to or above us, so it felt like a peaceful little sanctuary. Our cat seemed happier, and honestly, for the first month, it was all good. No strange noises, no weird feelings. But then, the little things started again. At first, it was just missing keys, small noises like tapping or scratching, and the cat acting like something invisible was brushing against her. We tried to brush it off, stayed positive, made noise to push whatever it was away. One night changed everything. We were folding laundry in the hallway closet when suddenly the door was slammed shut, like ripped from my partner's hands. We had all the windows and doors closed, no fans or AC running, so there was no logical explanation. When we finally forced it open, we saw some fresh scratches at the bottom of the door. That's when we called my cousin to come cleanse the place again. During the cleansing, weird stuff happened. There was this fast tapping on the ceiling, even though we're the top floor, and heavy breathing coming from the linen closet. My cousin said she felt like we were in real danger, which shook us up. Then one night, after a movie, we were asleep on the couch when the linen closet door next to the TV flew wide open. All the linen spilled out, and the door actually fell off its hinges. The thing is, the linens were in plastic tubs hanging on a bar, and nothing else was disturbed. It was like something just threw everything out. Ever since that night, the closet door swings open and closed on its own. Tepals and sheets get tossed around. My partner says he sees a small, dark shadow lurking in the corner of the closet when it moves. Our cat won't even go near that door anymore and hides in the back bedroom. At night, we hear scratching and banging from the walls. Last night was the worst. We were trying to sleep when there was a huge bang from the closet. My partner finally yelled at whatever it was to leave us alone. Then we saw it. A black figure with glowing red eyes peeking from the doorframe. It was solid black, like a shadow, and completely terrifying. We freaked out and ended up sleeping in our car with the cat. This morning we came back to find the apartment torn up. Everything was a mess except a few photo frames. It's clear this dark presence has followed us here, and it's not going anywhere. I just hope we can stay safe and that it doesn't get any worse. But honestly, I'm scared that it might. Hey there. I want to share a story that's been passed down in my family. Something that's both eerie and oddly touching. So, back in the early 70s, my grandma made a brave move. She left my grandpa, who was pretty harsh, well before I was born. She took two of her daughters, my mom and my aunt, and they settled into a new house. Now, my aunt started dating this guy who was kind of your classic greaser. You know, leather jacket, slicked back hair, and driving a hot rod. Every night, he'd park down the street and sneak up to my aunt's bedroom window at the back of the house, tapping lightly before she'd let him in. The driveway was gravel, and it ran right past my mom's room, so she could always hear his boots crunching as he walked by. Eventually, my aunt met another guy, who became my uncle, and they got serious. She ended things with the greaser, but he didn't take it well. One night, he showed up, tapping on the window as usual. They talked for over an hour, then he left. Right after, the phone rang. Her friend was on the line, crying. The greaser had just killed himself, driving around with a friend, shooting mailboxes, and then turned the gun on himself in a parking lot. My aunt was shocked because she'd just seen him leave her house. Then she looked up and saw him standing outside the living room window, blood on his face, staring right at her. She screamed, woke everyone up, and he vanished. That was the only time my aunt ever really spoke about it, and even then, it was just once. Over the years, my mom and grandma filled in the rest for me. After that night, my mom would hear those boots crunching outside every night, and my aunt kept hearing the tapping on her window. It got so intense that my aunt begged my mom to swap rooms, but then my mom started hearing the tapping herself. Grandma also mentioned they'd find cigarette butts around the house, only his brand. And strange things kept happening, like Grandma waking up one morning feeling like she was pressed against the ceiling, then the bed crashing back down when she screamed. Fast forward to 2008, I happened to deliver a pizza to that old house. When I asked if anything strange ever happened there, the woman froze and said the back room window was still tapped on regularly, with knocking on the side door. And even though the driveway was paved now, she could hear boots all the time. Her husband worked nights and didn't believe her, but she swore something was still there. Almost every night. It's a haunting reminder that some paths never really leave us, and sometimes echoes linger in the quietest corners of our lives. Hey there, I want to share a story that's been passed down in my family, something that's both eerie and oddly touching. So, back in the early 70s, my grandma made a brave move. She left my grandpa, who was pretty harsh, well before I was born. She took two of her daughters, my mom and my aunt, and they settled into a new house. Now, my aunt started dating this guy who was kind of your classic greaser. You know, leather jacket, slicked back hair, and driving a hot rod. Every night, he'd park down the street and sneak up to my aunt's bedroom window at the back of the house, tapping lightly before she'd let him in. The driveway was gravel, and it ran right past my mom's room, so she could always hear his boots crunching as he walked by. Eventually, my aunt met another guy, who became my uncle, and they got serious. She ended things with the greaser, but he didn't take it well. One night, he showed up, tapping on the window as usual. They talked for over an hour, then he left. Right after, the phone rang. Her friend was on the line, crying. The greaser had just killed himself, driving around with a friend, shooting mailboxes, and then turned the gun on himself in a parking lot. My aunt was shocked because she'd just seen him leave her house. Then she looked up and saw him standing outside the living room window, blood on his face, staring right at her. She screamed, woke everyone up, and he vanished. That was the only time my aunt ever really spoke about it, and even then, it was just once. Over the years, my mom and grandma filled in the rest for me. After that night, my mom would hear those boots crunching outside every night, and my aunt kept hearing the tapping on her window. It got so intense that my aunt begged my mom to swap rooms, but then my mom started hearing the tapping herself. Grandma also mentioned they'd find cigarette butts around the house, only his brand, and strange things kept happening, like Grandma waking up one morning feeling like she was pressed against the ceiling, then the bed crashing back down when she screamed. Fast forward to 2008, I happened to deliver a pizza to that old house. When I asked if anything strange ever happened there, the woman froze and said the back room window was still tapped on regularly, with knocking on the side door, and even though the driveway was paved now, she could hear boots all the time. Her husband worked nights and didn't believe her, but she swore something was still there, almost every night. It's a haunting reminder that some pasts never really leave us, and sometimes echoes linger in the quietest corners of our lives. Hey, I want to share this really strange experience my partner and I had a few years back. It was during a scorching summer, and we decided to escape the heat with a picnic in this old forest we knew had quite a bit of history. Now, one day, as we were packing up to leave, something unusual happened. We were starting our walk back when, suddenly, a woman appeared ahead of us, maybe 300 or 400 yards away. She was wearing a black and white striped top and khaki pants, kind of like the classic safari style. She was walking toward us, but then stopped, looked directly at us, and without a word, turned and hurried away, faster than she had come. My partner and I thought that was odd, so we started jogging to catch up, but she just vanished. We took the main path back, the one we originally came in on, and when we reached the entrance, my dad was there in his car to pick us up. I asked him if he had seen anyone like that woman, but he said no. Just a family of 4 had walked in, and there was only one other car in the lot. When we got home, I did some digging and found out that a woman in her 30s or 40s had taken her life in that very forest. Her description matched exactly what we saw. The clothes, the age, everything. This was the only ghost I've ever truly seen. I've noticed shadows and felt odd presences before, but never a full figure like that. It really stuck with me. Hey, I want to share some stories that have stuck with me over the years, things that felt a little off. So, when I was a kid, I lived in this old apartment building in a town rich with history, right next to a bunch of cemeteries. Our building was pretty worn down even back in the 90s. We had this shared laundry area down in the garage, and to get there, you had to open this huge, rusty metal gate that creaked like crazy, echoing through the whole space. It was impossible to be quiet down there because every little sound bounced around. Now, my neighborhood wasn't the safest, so whenever I went down to do laundry, especially since my mom was busy with my younger siblings, I made sure to lock that gate behind me. The laundry was actually just a corner of the garage with an open space, so I could see anyone coming, and I knew I'd hear them. One holiday weekend, when most neighbors had left town, I was folding clothes when I noticed a little boy bouncing a big red rubber ball nearby. I was startled since I hadn't heard the gate or anyone coming in. What really freaked me out was that the ball made no sound, and in that echoey garage, even a sneeze would have been loud. Then, the ball bounced toward the wall, but instead of coming back, it vanished right through it. The boy chased after it and disappeared too, just like that. I packed up my laundry in a rush and ran back upstairs, completely forgetting to lock the gate. I never saw that boy again, but others around the building reported seeing him too, wearing a striped rainbow vest and shorts. He always looked solid, not ghostly, but vanished so fast it was like he was never there. Now, shifting gears, I'll share something a friend told me about her college experience at an old Catholic all-girls school. The campus was nearly 100 years old, with cemeteries for the nuns on the grounds. One night, around 10 p.m., she really had to use the restroom in the basement. She usually avoided it, but this time she went down. When she opened the bathroom door, she saw a stall door closed and thought it was a friend. She peeked under to see their blue Crocs, but there was no one there. Then, suddenly, the toilet paper started ripping off the roll so fast it shook the dispenser. Her heart raced, but she told herself someone was just in a hurry. As she left, the stall door slammed open violently, like it was kicked. She ran to the stairs, and the bathroom door slammed open again behind her. Heavy, fast footsteps sounded like they were chasing her up the stairs. She made it to her dorm room, locked the door, and the footsteps stopped abruptly in the hallway. She looked around, but no one was there. Even now, she's unsettled by that night and avoids that bathroom entirely. Lastly, another story from my college days. During winter break, my roommate and I decided to bunk our beds. She took the top bunk, and I took the bottom. She worked night shifts, so often the room was empty at night. One Friday night, I came back around 10 p.m. and felt this strange unease in the room. I got ready for bed, but couldn't shake the feeling. Then I woke up in the middle of the night, freezing, even though I'm usually warm. The room was lit with deep red LED lights, and I heard this quiet, raspy moan that sounded almost like an old man sleeping with his mouth open. Looking up at the sagging mattress above me, I gently pushed it with my feet, but it felt heavier than usual. The moan came again. When I checked my phone, it was only midnight, way too early for my roommate to be back. I tried to see who was there, but as soon as my foot hit the floor, the mattress above me shifted like something heavy had lifted off it. I ran out crying, feeling completely defeated. When my roommate returned, she laughed it off until she noticed her bed was messy, and it had been made before she left for work. That was one of the creepiest nights I've had, and after that, I never wanted to share a room again. These experiences, whether it's the boy in the garage, the footsteps chasing my friend, or the mysterious presence in my dorm have stayed with me. They remind me that sometimes the unseen world is closer than we think, quietly sharing our spaces in ways we can't always understand. Hey, I want to share this eerie experience that happened a short while ago at my family's old property, tucked away in the forest. So, my great-grandpa once bought this big piece of land surrounded by dense woods here in Quebec, and over the years, our family has preserved some really old log cabins and buildings there, some dating back to the 1700s and 1800s. They're these quaint little homes, nothing fancy, and we've occasionally rented them out as cottages. People often talk about feeling spirits or strange presences around those buildings, but honestly, I never experienced anything unusual in all the years I've stayed there. Until one night not long ago. My boyfriend and I like to hang out in this 2-story observatory on the property. It's got these outside stairs leading to the second floor where you can see the stars. One night, around 9:30, we went there and somehow ended up falling asleep on the couch by 11. I woke up suddenly at about 1:30 a.m. and nudged him awake, ready to head home. Now, our house is just a 5-minute walk through the woods from there. When he opened the door, this strange music drifted in. It was piano music, soft and kind of melancholic, almost like a sad classical piece, but I couldn't recognize the tune. At first, it sounded far away, like elevator music or something ambient, but when I opened the door again, it was right there, clear as day, as if someone was playing the piano right on the balcony upstairs. The weird thing is, there's no piano or any instruments up there, and we didn't bring any speakers. Both of us heard it distinctly. The music stopped as soon as the door was closed, so it had to be coming from outside. We were both freaked out. I called my mom to come pick us up, and when she arrived, the music had vanished, and there was no sign anyone had been up on that balcony. No footsteps, nothing, just the piano. And here's the strange part. My mom told us that just minutes before I called her, my sibling woke her up because of this high-pitched noise outside their room. Even our usually calm dog was crying that night. Then, 2 days later, my grandmother mentioned that at the same time the piano played, a man in our town claimed to have seen a UFO. Lights flickering in the sky, then suddenly gone. I can't help but wonder if all these things are connected. Maybe one of the antique objects my grandmother moved upstairs recently has a spirit attached to it? I don't know. All I can say is that piano music in the middle of the woods at night isn't something you easily forget. Hey, I want to share something really strange that happened to my family back in 2007 when we were visiting rural India. It's one of those stories that still puzzles me, even after all these years. So picture this. My mom, her sister, and I were invited by some distant relatives we barely knew to their home for tea and dinner. It was a long, bumpy drive deep into the countryside, surrounded by farmland and old, run-down houses. We spent the day there and ended up staying the night because it was late and the roads were tough to navigate in the dark. Now, it was summer, and without air conditioning, it was sweltering inside. So, like many locals, my mom and I decided to sleep outside on these traditional beds called manjas. We set up under a tree in their front yard, a dusty, empty space, not like a typical garden or anything. The others slept farther away, and I honestly don't know why we weren't closer to them. In the middle of the night, my mom suddenly woke up gasping and crying, which woke me too. She told me a man had been on top of her, strangling her. I thought maybe she was having a nightmare, but then my aunt came over with a flashlight. When she shone it on my mom's neck, there were red marks, clear as day. We were all confused because the gate was locked, and no one had entered or left as far as we could tell. Here's where it gets even stranger. The next day, before we left, we visited the house behind where we stayed. My mom saw a photo on the wall and froze. She said the man in that picture was the one who strangled her the night before. But she'd never met or even heard of the man before. The family there looked confused and said he was dead. He'd recently died after being hit by a truck on the road right in front of their property. I've tried to make sense of it logically, but I just can't. If my mom was dreaming, how do you explain the marks on her neck and her knowing exactly what he looked like before seeing the photo? To this day, it's a mystery to us. So I'm sharing this story because maybe someone out there has some ideas or has experienced something similar. It's one of those moments where reality and the unexplainable just collide. You know, I never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. Until that one night, back when I was a kid, living in a small town called Coltmont, Pennsylvania. Our house was one of those duplexes, you know, where two families share one building but have separate sides. I always felt a bit uneasy there. The stairs, both going up and down, would make me feel like they were burning. Literally, my skin would flush red, and I'd start struggling to breathe. At one point, it got so intense that I actually passed out. My parents thought it was asthma, but the doctors ran every test and said I was perfectly healthy. But the real story centers on my bedroom when I was about 7 years old. One night, I was sound asleep with SpongeBob playing softly on TV. When I woke up, I saw this older man sitting in my rocking chair. He was soaking wet, with stringy hair barely clinging to his head, wearing a stained tank top and boxers with chains wrapped around his legs. His eyes were a cold, dark brown, and he had this crooked, unsettling grin. Then he vanished. But right after, I heard this eerie sound coming from my closet, along with a strange light glowing from inside. When I opened it, I found my Furby, still talking non-stop even after I'd taken the batteries out. And then, turning around, there he was again, the man, with that same creepy grin. He charged at me, and I dropped to the floor, overwhelmed by a sudden icy chill. The next thing I knew, I was soaked, gasping for air. I screamed, and just then, my bedroom door slammed open. My parents rushed in. I remember yelling, "The devil! The devil!" as my mom held me close and my dad was trying to figure out why I was drenched. After I calmed down, I told them everything. My dad, who was going through a divorce at the time, admitted he'd seen that man before, but wouldn't say more. Now, years later, it's just me and my mom living together. And though I'm safe, that night still haunts me. It was like something was tormenting me from the shadows. And to fast forward a bit, in 2021, after a huge fight with my dad, things got even worse, leading to court and all. But through it all, I'm grateful to be where I am now. And I'm still trying to make sense of that night when I first truly believed there's more to this world than what we see. Hey, I want to share a story about a trip I took a couple years back. It might sound pretty normal to some, but the feelings I had that day were intense. Something primal I can't quite put into words. So my ex, let's call her Emma, and I booked this charming little homestead for a weekend getaway. We found it online with glowing reviews, managed by this wonderfully warm elderly couple. The place was nestled right in the middle of a vast estate surrounded by coffee plantations, and it even had its own private waterfall. Behind the estate, there were these large hills, mostly owned by the couple. Our little cottage sat cozily between the main house, where the couple lived, and another larger cottage where some families were staying. It was all surrounded by beautifully kept gardens. A narrow path ran in front of the cottages and led towards the hills. Our first day was pretty chill. We were wiped out from the long drive from the city and just soaked in the warm hospitality and the stunning views. The next day, we had to decide between visiting the waterfall or hiking up the hills. After some back and forth, Emma picked the hills. So, just after 10 in the morning, we packed a simple brunch and started down the path toward the hills. The weather was cool, with a light drizzle that brought out the fresh scent of damp earth. Very refreshing for us city folks. As we reached the end of the winding path, we faced a steep climb straight up the hill, or an unpaved path that skirted around it. Since everything was wet and slippery, we thought the longer path might offer a gentler climb. So, we took that route. But about 10 minutes in, the scenery changed dramatically. Instead of open land, we found ourselves in a ravine, with dense trees blocking much of the sunlight. It was like stepping into a jungle. Still, we pressed on, hoping to find a better route up the hill, which had disappeared from view due to the terrain. After about an hour navigating the ravine, we came across a fork, dense jungle to the left and a run-down wooden hut to the right, long abandoned. We stopped to catch our breath when, suddenly, a chorus of angry barks erupted. 7 or 8 dogs, maybe more, closing in fast. We didn't stick around to find out more and hurried back the way we came. Once the barking faded, we discovered the bushes and grass around us were crawling with leeches trying to latch on. Emma panicked, and I had to sprint through the rocky ravine to catch up to her. Eventually, we made it back to the steep part of the hill. By then, I was ready to call it quits, but Emma convinced me to scramble up the steep slope on all fours, getting dirt and grass all over me in the process. To my relief, the tough climb gave way to a lush meadow bordered by bushes with sweet-smelling wildflowers on one side and rolling fields where cattle grazed peacefully on the other. We spent about an hour and a half hiking through the meadow until we found a muddy path up a gentler hill. Cresting that hill, the view was breathtaking. A sheer drop on the other side revealed valleys below, stretching out endlessly. We rested, ate our food, and soaked in the scenery. The clouds would pass and sprinkle us briefly before the sun returned. It felt like paradise to us city dwellers. By 5 p.m., I was itching to start heading back. Slipping on wet grass in fading light was a recipe for disaster. After some coaxing, Emma agreed, and we began our descent. That's when the silence hit me. No birds, no insects, not even a breeze. It was eerie. We were losing daylight fast, and the hills felt deserted. Then I got this overwhelming sensation of being watched. From behind, and then from all around except the front. My skin prickled, and I went from joking around to being unnervingly quiet and hyper-alert. Emma noticed and got creeped out by my sudden change, but didn't feel the same. I asked her to go ahead while I stayed behind, wanting to shield her in case something or someone was lurking. The feeling didn't fade. Instead, it intensified. I felt anger, like whatever was watching us was furious we were there, like we didn't belong. Still, no sound, no wind, just this heavy silence. Then, out of nowhere, a dog appeared behind me. A skinny, wary brown mutt with his tail tucked low. He followed us at a distance, and although I was cautious, his presence eased my nerves a bit. We let him pass, and he kept cruising ahead, then waiting for us to catch up, repeating this until we finally reached the bottom of the hill. It was like he was escorting us to safety. Focused on the dog, I tried to ignore the lingering unease. By then, it was dark. When we reached the paved path, it was pitch black, but the dog stayed with us, wagging his tail and getting closer. Soon, we saw lights in the distance, our cottage. The dog followed us all the way back and then disappeared as quietly as he'd come. The moment we left the hill behind, the oppressive feeling lifted, and the sounds of insects and nature returned, as if someone flipped a switch. That night, we told our hosts what happened. They'd been worried since we were expected back by 4 p.m. and had tried calling us, but there was no phone signal up there. I asked about the dog, and they said he was a stray known for escorting visitors safely back to their cottages before vanishing. They called him a miracle, a guardian of sorts. Some might chalk this up to anxiety, but I've dealt with stress before, and this was different. Real, raw, and unforgettable. That dog saved us in a way I can't fully explain. The only other time I felt something like that was on a jungle safari, when our group was followed by a predator. So yeah, that's my story. A strange, wild hike turned into a lesson about respect, fear, and unexpected guardians. Hey, I want to share a story that's been with me for years. Something my grandma used to tell me, and what I experienced myself. So, there's this house. It's not ancient, maybe around 50 years old, that my grandparents lived in, and later, my mom and I lived there too when I was a kid. Before we moved to a newer place on the edge of town, that house held something unusual. My grandma always said there was a friend living there. That's how she described it. A presence that roams the house at night. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of it in the corner of your eye, like a shadow moving just out of clear sight. It never hurt anyone, at least as far as we know. Grandma even told me once she woke up to see this friend sitting at the foot of her bed, just watching her, before fading away seconds later. She kept a plate with salt under her bed, maybe as protection. Years later, my mom, stepdad, and I lived in that house for about 3 years. My parents slept in the old grandparents' bedroom, where the salt was still there, so maybe they didn't feel anything strange or were just less sensitive to it. But I slept in my old childhood room without any protective things, and that's when I started noticing odd things. Shadows moving at night and sometimes during the day, strange noises, and waking up in the middle of the night feeling uneasy, like something was near or had just passed. One summer, since the house didn't have air conditioning, I sometimes slept on the living room couch to catch the breeze. I remember 2 nights where I woke up drenched in sweat, my mom saying I was screaming, probably sleep paralysis, but it was terrifying. I never saw the friend like Grandma did, but I'm convinced there was something there. Now, I live on the outskirts of the same town, right across from the graveyard actually, and honestly, it's peaceful here. No shadows, no weird sounds, just quiet nights. When I do go back to that old house to grab something, it's only for a short time, and I don't feel anything unusual anymore. But those experiences, they'll stick with me forever. Oh, and before all this, when I lived in a flat, there was one night that still haunts me. After a long car trip, my parents left, and I went to take a shower. Just before stepping into the bathroom, I caught sight of something. A tall woman in a wedding dress, standing there for just a moment before disappearing. I was frozen, then rushed into the shower and waited for my parents to come back. I never told them because I figured it was just travel fatigue, but who knows? That was the only time something like that happened there. So yeah, Grandma was right. There really is something in that house. Hey there, let me tell you about this one night that stuck with me. So, I've been driving trucks for just under a year now, still pretty new to the whole thing, but I get to see some amazing sights on those late-night hauls between New Mexico and Arizona. You know, those shooting stars you catch around 3 a.m.? Well, usually they're just meteors or space debris burning up as they fall through the atmosphere. But this one night, I saw something different. There was this star. At first, it just hung there in the sky like any other star. It didn't drop or streak like a typical shooting star. It stayed still, bright and steady, almost like it was waiting for something. Then, suddenly, it shot up and disappeared in a flash, like it burned out of the atmosphere in an instant. I've never seen anything like that before, and honestly, it had me scratching my head. It was bright enough to look like a star just hanging out, but then it moved like it had somewhere urgent to be. That's just one of many strange things I've noticed while driving those quiet roads from midnight until noon. The traffic's lighter, parking is easier, and the world feels a little different, like there's more to see if you're paying attention. I'm still learning the ropes as a trucker, but nights like that make me realize there's a whole lot out there beyond the ordinary. Hey, I want to share a story from my childhood that stuck with me for a long time. It's about this old farmhouse I grew up in with my dad. An 8-bedroom place, way bigger than we needed. Because of its size and age, there was always this weird feeling around the house, like shadows were lurking just out of sight. I was that kid who, if I had to get a drink at night, would keep my eyes glued to the floor, too scared to look up at the dark corners or the windows. Mirrors? Forget about it. I didn't want to see what might be staring back at me. When I was about 11, I started wondering why the room that used to be my baby nursery was locked from the outside. I thought maybe Dad just wanted to keep me out since I wasn't a kid anymore. So naturally, I asked him one day, poking around like a curious preteen. His face got serious, and he sat me down to explain. Turns out, when I was a toddler, that nursery was right next to Dad's room. My sister had painted it for me, all Winnie the Pooh characters and fluffy clouds, really sweet stuff that I still appreciate. I even have an old photo of me grinning up at Pooh Bear on the wall while we were setting it up. But every night, Dad would be woken up by my terrified screams. He'd check on me, but nothing was wrong. No hunger, no diaper issues, nothing. He thought maybe it was just the big step of sleeping alone that scared me. One night, Dad decided to spend the night in the nursery himself, hoping to figure out what was going on. I was able to fall asleep with him there, but he couldn't get comfortable on the hardwood floor. Then, out of nowhere, he felt these huge, heavy thumps right under him, like someone was pounding on the floor from below. He jumped up and rushed downstairs to check, but everything was locked up tight. No one was there. After that, Dad brought my crib back into his room. He even brought in a Bible and did what he could to rig the nursery of whatever was haunting it. The room was locked up and used only for storage after that, and the lock is still there to this day. It's funny how a simple lock can feel like the only thing standing between you and something you can't explain. Growing up in that house, I never really felt safe sleeping alone. I'd often crash on the living room couch with the TV on, just to feel less alone. There were other strange things in that farmhouse, but that nursery experience? That was the most direct brush with something dark and unsettling that Dad ever had. I want to start by saying this happened several years ago, and I'm in a much better place now. I'm not the same person I was then. I've gotten help, I've grown, and life feels a lot more open than it did back then. But this is something I still think about, because I've never been able to fully explain what happened that night. This was around 2021. I was 21, the pandemic was still heavy over everything, and honestly, I was not doing well. The world felt strange and unstable, and inside my own head, things felt just as chaotic. I had struggled with self-harm and suicidal thoughts before, and that year was one of the lowest points of my life. There were a few nights where I came dangerously close to ending everything. I was scared of dying, but I was also exhausted from living the way I was living. One night, very late, I was alone in my bedroom. The lights were off, but there was a street lamp outside my window, and its glow came through my dark blue curtains. It gave the whole room this cold, bluish tint. I could still make out the shape of my bed, the closet, the door, little outlines of everything. I was in a terrible state of mind. I had done something to hurt myself, and I was kneeling on the floor near my closet. Everything felt tight and distorted, and after a short while, the room started to blur around the edges. The shapes of things stopped looking solid. It was like the whole room was losing its grip on reality. Then I looked down. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Around my knees, where they pressed into the carpet, there was this darkness. Not just a shadow from the room, but something thicker. It looked almost like black water pooling around my legs. I didn't feel anything cold or wet. There was no sensation at all. But I could see it. Then the darkness started moving. It crawled upward, slowly, almost like thin fingers made of smoke. These shadowy strands began climbing my pants, moving up my legs toward my waist. I remember staring at them, completely stunned, not even sure if I was awake enough to trust what I was seeing. But they kept rising. By the time they reached my stomach, the ends of them started changing shape. They looked like hands, or something close to hands. Little dark fingertips formed at the ends, and then they seemed to grip me. I still couldn't feel them, but I could see them holding on. And the worst part was that they didn't seem like they were trying to comfort me. They looked like they were pulling me downward. That snapped something in me. I panicked, got myself free, and stumbled onto my bed. I just collapsed there and cried. I didn't look back at the floor. I didn't want to know if the shadows were still there. I didn't want to know if I had imagined it, or if something had actually been in that room with me. Even now, I don't know what it was. The most logical answer is that I hallucinated it. I was under extreme stress, barely able to think clearly, and the room was already starting to blur and shift. So maybe my mind created something terrifying in that moment. But part of me still wonders. Maybe something saw how close I was to leaving and came near. Maybe it was there to stop me. Maybe it was there to take me. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if those hands were waiting for me to let go completely, and if I had, where would they have dragged me? I'm okay now. I really am. I'm happier. I'm looking forward to things again, and I believe there's good waiting for me. But that night never fully left me. And whatever those shadows were, real or not, I'm grateful they scared me enough to stay. I'm not really sure where to start, because what happened to me last night honestly shook me more than I expected. I think I saw something. I know how that sounds, and a part of me still wants to explain it away, but I can't. Not completely. A few days before it happened, around June 8th, I had this long conversation with two of my friends about ghosts. I grew up in a religious household, and I was always taught that ghosts weren't real. Later on, after I became an atheist, I kept that same habit of brushing off anything strange. Every weird sound, every odd feeling, every shadow in the corner of my eye, I'd just tell myself I was being paranoid. But after that conversation, something in me shifted a little. I started wondering if maybe there was more to it than I'd been willing to admit. And because of that, ghosts were on my mind a lot. Then, yesterday, everything felt different. I was walking back and forth in the hallway, which is something I do pretty often when I'm stressed. It usually helps me calm down. But while I was pacing, I suddenly got this heavy feeling, like I wasn't alone. Not just a nervous feeling, it felt like I was being watched. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in my granddad's old office. My granddad passed away more than a year ago, but I knew it wasn't him. I don't believe he would ever scare me like that. Whatever this was, it didn't feel familiar. It didn't feel safe. The feeling got stronger, so I went straight into my room and shut the door. I don't know why, but I truly believed it couldn't come into my room. Maybe that belief was the only thing keeping me from completely panicking. At first, I just sat on my bed trying to breathe. Then I suddenly got thirsty, which was strange because I had just had water not long before. I hadn't even been pacing for that long. It felt less like normal thirst and more like something trying to make me leave the room. I could still feel that presence outside my door, so I stayed where I was. That's when things started getting worse. Some parts are blurry now, and I only know the timing because of messages I sent to my friends while it was happening. The first thing I remember clearly was my ears ringing. It started faint, but it kept coming and going. Then I began zoning out whenever I looked toward the door or the wall beside it. I could just glance in that direction and suddenly find myself staring, completely locked in place. I don't know how long it lasted each time, because time felt wrong. It felt like it was moving too fast and too slow at once. At one point, it almost felt like I could see the air. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's the only way I can describe it. Everything looked strange and charged, so I kept my head down and tried not to look anywhere near the doorway. Then both of my lights started flickering. I have one light in my room and another in my closet, and they both flickered at the same time. They would cut out, then come back on. The ringing in my ears kept returning, and somewhere outside, I heard an owl. Owls are rare where I live, and the sound was strange. It sounded far away and close at the same time. Even my phone felt wrong. It felt much heavier in my hands than it should have, like I was holding a brick instead of a phone. My door doesn't have a proper doorknob, and when I accidentally zoned out looking that way again, I saw a shape moving toward me. I snapped myself out of it, but it felt too close. Then I started seeing tiny white dots near the doorway. Sparkles, I guess. That's the closest word for it. They would appear and disappear, over and over. They weren't just in the corner of my eye either. I could see them directly, even when I wasn't zoning out. Toward the end, I began hearing this awful noise. It sounded animal-like, but not like any animal I know. It wasn't exactly a growl, but it had that same threatening feeling. It felt hostile, wrong. At that point, I remembered something I had found online, so I started repeating, "You're not welcome here. You need to leave." The more I said it, the worse everything got. The ringing in my ears grew louder, and I got this strange pressure in my head. Then I heard a voice inside my mind. It wasn't mine. I don't remember what it said, but I remember the fear that came with it. It was the kind of fear that makes your whole body go cold. Somehow, I kept repeating the words anyway. "You're not welcome here. You need to leave." I said it again and again, even though I was terrified. After more than an hour, the presence finally faded. I didn't feel it outside my room anymore, but I still couldn't move for a long time. I left my light on all night, and I didn't leave my room until about 2 hours after everything stopped. Even then, it was only because I had to use the bathroom. I've ordered a protective bracelet, but it won't arrive for a while. I don't know what I experienced. I don't know if it was a spirit, a ghost, or something else entirely. But I know how it felt. And if it comes back, I honestly don't know what I'm supposed to do. I've lived in this house for about 6 years now, maybe closer to 7. And when we first moved in, everything seemed normal. The place looked fairly new, nothing felt strange at first, and honestly, I never had any reason to question it. I've tried looking online to find out more about the house, like when it was built or who lived here before, but I haven't really found much yet. I'm planning to keep digging though, because lately it feels like there's something I'm missing. Not long after we moved in, I remember walking past the living room late at night and seeing what looked like someone sitting on the couch. It was only in the corner of my eye, just for a second, but it stopped me cold. I still see things like that sometimes, little shapes or movement just outside my direct vision. Most of the time, I don't acknowledge it. I just tell myself it's my imagination playing tricks on me, because honestly, that feels easier. But there's one room upstairs that I genuinely hate. It's the spare bedroom, and I cannot explain how awful it feels in there. I don't go in at night. I don't even look through the doorway when the light is off. There's something about that room that makes my skin crawl. The energy feels heavy and wrong, like the air changes the second you get near it. My chest gets tight, and I get this tingling feeling across my back, the kind you get when you're convinced someone is standing behind you. I'm barely ever in that room, so I can't say I've seen or heard anything specific in there, but the feeling alone is enough to keep me away. The garage is almost directly beneath that spare room. Not completely, because part of the garage roof sticks out under the bedroom window, but I'm pretty sure it extends under most of the room. The garage door is electric, and it has sensors that beep if something presses against the door for more than a couple seconds. It also makes a clicking sound if the door is touched once. Recently, the garage door has started beeping randomly at night. It doesn't happen during the day. It mostly happens when my boyfriend, Callan, isn't home and I'm alone. The beeping usually lasts anywhere from 2 seconds to maybe 10. Then it stops completely and doesn't happen again. Every time I try to explain it away. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe the sensors are glitchy. Maybe it's just an old system being weird. But after it happens, the air in the garage feels different. Heavy. Still. And I get that same horrible feeling I get from the spare room, like I'm being watched. Lately, I've also started hearing noises when I'm in bed. They come from different parts of the house. Sometimes it's knocking. Sometimes it sounds like slow footsteps moving along the upstairs hallway. But the footsteps don't lead to anything. No bathroom door. No one getting back into bed. They just move for a bit, then stop. Again, I keep trying to rationalize it. Maybe it's my cat. Maybe someone in the house is half asleep and walking around. Maybe the house is settling. I really do try to talk myself out of being scared, but there's this feeling underneath all of it that something is off. Then last night, around 1:30 in the morning, there was this incredibly loud banging from downstairs. I have never heard anything like it in this house before. My mom heard it too, and neither of us could figure out what it was. I waited a few minutes after it stopped, then went downstairs to check, but there was nothing obvious. Nothing had fallen. Nothing looked out of place. I couldn't find anything that could have made that sound. It has honestly shaken me. I know some people might not take this seriously, but I'm not making it up. Maybe I'm just anxious. Maybe I'm overthinking everything, and part of me really hopes that's all it is. But between the spare room, the garage door, the footsteps, and now that banging, I can't shake the feeling that something strange is happening in this house. I had something happen to me a few years ago that I still don't really know how to explain. And honestly, I'd love to hear what you think about it. Before I get into it, I should mention that I'm not writing this in my first language. I'm using AI to help translate it, just so I can explain everything as clearly as possible. At the time, I was living in an old apartment in Belgium, right in the city center of Liège. The building had once been part of an old distillery, so it already had that heavy, historic feeling to it, the kind of place where the walls seem to remember more than they should. One night, I was lying in bed, unable to fall asleep. That was pretty normal for me. I've always needed a long time to drift off. I was just staring into the room, trying to relax, nothing unusual happening. My bedroom door was closed, but not completely. I always left it open just a little so my cat could come in if she wanted. I didn't like seeing the hallway at night, so I never left it wide open. Then, out of nowhere, I started feeling this deep pressure of fear coming from the direction of the door. It wasn't just normal anxiety. It felt focused, almost like the fear had a source. I kept staring at the gap in the doorway, and the longer I looked, the worse it got. I had this awful feeling that the door was slowly opening on its own, even though I couldn't tell if it was actually moving or if my mind was making it seem that way. I pulled my blanket tighter around me and shifted closer to the wall. I remember gripping the fabric so hard my hands hurt. Then suddenly, my head tilted back on its own, or at least that's what it felt like, and I started seeing these bright, violent spirals of color. They were spinning and rushing everywhere, almost attacking my vision. I was shaking badly. It only lasted several seconds, but it felt much longer. Somehow, I managed to reach up and turn on the light. There was a switch right above my bed. Once the room was bright again, everything stopped. I sat there trying to breathe normally. I drank some water, stayed awake for a while, and eventually managed to fall asleep. The next morning, my father told me something that made the whole thing worse. He said he had gotten up during the night to use the bathroom, and when he passed my room, he looked in to see if I was asleep. He said he saw a dark figure standing near my desk, beside the chair. At first, he thought it was me. But I had been in bed the whole time. I still don't know what to make of that. Around that same period, I had a few other strange experiences too. One of the strongest happened while I was asleep, although I hesitate to call it a dream. It felt completely different from my normal dreams. Usually, my dreams are like little chaotic stories, strange places, strange people, things happening for no real reason. But this was not like that. In this experience, I wasn't myself. I wasn't even a person. I was more like a viewpoint, like a camera floating through a scene. I saw an abandoned chapel in the middle of a clearing. Around it were broken stone walls, half covered with moss and weeds. The place looked forgotten, but not peaceful. I remember feeling an urgent need to go inside, as if something was pulling me there. Then there was a sudden flash, and my point of view was inside the chapel. The fear started building again, slowly at first, then very quickly. And then, without warning, it sounded like hundreds of white porcelain plates had been dropped onto the floor all at once. They shattered everywhere. The noise was impossibly loud. I woke up instantly, sitting in my bed with my hands over my ears. Again, I turned on the light right away. I don't know what happened. I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I could move. I don't think it was a lucid dream either, because I wasn't aware I was dreaming and I didn't have control over anything. There's also something else that might be relevant. I'm 20 now, and I come from a Slavic family. Not long ago, I found out that on my mother's side, in Belarus, there were women in the family who were believed to be witches. One of them was my mother's grandmother. Some relatives say she practiced dark magic, or at least harmful forms of witchcraft, and that it brought bad luck onto the family. For example, I have a cousin on my mother's side who was born with a disability, and some people in the family believe it could be connected to whatever my great-grandmother was involved in. I want to be clear, though. I only became interested in paranormal things recently. Back when these experiences happened, I wasn't reading about ghosts or spirits or witchcraft. I wasn't looking for that kind of explanation. That's why I'm still torn. Part of me wants to believe there's a rational explanation, something related to sleep, stress, or the mind playing tricks in the dark. But another part of me can't stop thinking about the figure my father saw, the old building, the visions, and the strange stories from my family. I'm open to any explanation, rational or paranormal. I just want to understand what happened. So, a couple of days after I moved into this apartment, I started noticing strange little things. And honestly, the longer I've been here, the more they've been piling up. I've been living here for almost a month now, and the last couple of weeks especially have felt off. One of the first things that really got to me was this huge poster board I made back in middle school. It's about 3 feet wide, and it means a lot to me in this very specific, nostalgic way. When I first moved back in, I looked at the wall where it used to be, and it just wasn't there. I remember standing there, staring at that empty spot, thinking, I guess my parents must have thrown it out when they were staying here. And that made me kind of sad, because I had a lot of emotional memories attached to it. Over the next few weeks, I thought about it more than once. Just little moments of wondering where it had gone. Then one day, I came home from work, and there it was, just hanging on the wall like it had never left. I even asked my mom if she and my dad were messing with me somehow, like maybe this was some weird prank. But she swore it had been there the whole time. And I know myself, I would have noticed it. I mean, this thing is huge, and it matters to me. There is absolutely no way I would have missed it. The most annoying part is that every photo I had taken of that area somehow cuts off right where the poster would be, by barely a fraction of an inch. So I can't even prove to myself whether it was there or not. And yes, before anyone asks, I do have a carbon monoxide detector. It's literally right underneath where the poster board is, which almost makes the whole thing funnier in the worst possible way. But that wasn't the only thing. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting up on my computer when I saw this shadowy figure. It looked about 5'10", just standing there for a second. I haven't experienced anything like that in years, so it really caught me off guard. Then there are all these small things that keep appearing and disappearing. Nothing huge enough to make me feel completely certain, but enough to make me pause. Like I'll look at my water bottle 1 minute, and then the next time I'm glaring at it, the amount of water looks way different, even though I haven't touched it. Another time, one of my cats had an accident on the floor, so I put both cats in the bathroom while I cleaned everything really thoroughly. 12 hours later, there was fresh cat poop in the exact same area, even though the cats had supposedly been in the bathroom the entire time. I've also had 2 episodes of sleep paralysis since moving in, and I barely had any at all last year. One of them felt like someone was holding me down, not just the usual frozen feeling, but like there was actual pressure there. My cats have been acting strange too. Before I saw that shadowy figure, they kept staring into the exact same spot, like something was already there. You know how animals do that thing where they lock onto empty space and suddenly the whole room feels colder? It was like that. Then one morning, I woke up and found my cats in a totally different room from where I had left them when I went to sleep. I tried to explain that one away. Maybe I sleepwalked, even though I've never done that before. Maybe I moved them and forgot. But it still felt weird. Another time, I got up and felt my hair being pulled. I turned around and somehow it was caught on a curtain rod, even though I hadn't been sitting anywhere near the curtain. Then one night, I heard my apartment door handle shake. Not once. 3 times. Like someone was testing it. I checked and nobody was there. And the wind doesn't make that sound. I know the usual noises of this place by now, and that wasn't one of them. The strangest part might be how I feel inside the apartment. I've been feeling completely drained, like all the energy has been scooped out of me. Not just tired, but hollow. Almost like something is feeding off me. And then one day, I left the apartment for more than 12 hours, which is rare for me because I'm usually such a homebody. But while I was gone, I felt almost euphoric. Light. Free. That almost never happens for me, so it really stood out. The thing is, None of this has made me paranoid or terrified. The poster board thing definitely made me go, what the actual hell? But even the sleep paralysis hasn't really scared me. It's more annoying than anything. I just keep getting this feeling that whatever this is, whatever you want to call it, doesn't have good intentions. It feels like it's feeding off the depression I already had, using it like fuel. And the funny part is, I don't even really believe in ghosts being annoying like this. I don't fear them. I don't expect them to bother me. You'd think that would make me spiritually untouchable or something. Apparently not. I was freelancing for a design firm in a big city about 10 years ago, and most of the time I worked out at client sites. But every now and then I had to go into the actual office so I could sit down with the team and work through things face to face. Back then, my kids were still little. One was in preschool and the other was just starting elementary school. So my husband and I had this whole daily dance worked out around drop-offs, pickups, car line, work schedules, all of it. On the days I had to be in the office, I would get there ridiculously early, usually before anyone else, just so I could leave in time to handle the afternoon kid logistics. And that was exactly what happened that morning. I got there a little before 7 a.m., and I mean, I was alone. Not a few quiet people with headphones on, alone. The entire floor was empty. The building itself was nothing special. It was one of those plain concrete office buildings that looked like it had been put up sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, and then simply endured. Our company occupied one full floor in the middle of the building, and nobody else shared that space with us. The layout matters here because it's part of what made this so strange. There were two big common work areas where most of the designers and developers sat in cubicles. One was off to the side, and one was way down at the far end of the floor. That far end area was where I usually worked. On the opposite side, there were executive offices and conference rooms. Between those two ends were long hallways, a wide open foyer, and smaller meeting spaces where people could gather to work on projects. So that morning, before settling in, I needed coffee, naturally. The coffee station was near the far side of the building, across this wide foyer from some of the executive suites and conference rooms. I was standing there at the Keurig, waiting for it to sputter out its little cup of survival, when I happened to glance across the foyer. In one of the conference rooms, floating near the ceiling, was a shiny mylar balloon with a big smiley face on it. I didn't think anything of it at first. It was just one of those odd little things you notice in a quiet office. A happy little balloon in this very gray, corporate-looking space. I remember thinking something like, well, that's cute. And then my coffee finished, so I headed back to my cubicle. A couple of minutes later, I was sitting at my desk when I heard this faint scraping sound coming from the hallway I had just walked down. I looked up, and from around the corner, right where the last conference room ended and the cubicles began, came the smiley face balloon. It was moving slowly, very slowly, in a perfectly straight line down the hallway. There was no breeze, no obvious air vent pushing it, no heating or air conditioning kicking on. And to even get out of that conference room, it would have had to somehow dip below the door frame, glide out of the room, cross that space, and then continue all the way down the long hall. I just sat there, staring at it. Then it turned. Not randomly, not drifting vaguely. It turned right into my row of cubicles and started coming directly toward me. At that point, I was trying very hard to be rational. I remember thinking, okay, there has to be an air current. It's just going to float past. That's all this is. But it didn't float past. It stopped directly in front of my cubicle. Right in front of me. And it just hovered there, gently bobbing up and down, with that big, shiny smile on its face. That was enough for me. I packed up my things so fast I probably left a dust outline behind, and I got out of there. Whatever collaboration needed to happen that day, I decided it could happen over the phone. Later on, I found out that a senior executive at the company had died suddenly a few years before I started working there. I never knew for certain whether he had passed away in the building, though I did hear people say he had. And honestly, I've wondered ever since whether he was still around in some way, checking in on the office, making sure the place was running the way he liked it. All I know is this: that balloon came to find me, and it smiled the whole time. I'm still in high school as I'm telling this, and the things I'm about to talk about happened to me and some of my classmates over the past couple of years. But from what I understand, this didn't start with us. These stories go way back, even to when one of our teachers was a student here. For now, though, I'm only going to talk about the things I personally saw, heard about directly, or was involved in. And I want to be clear about something before I get into it. I'm a creative person, yes. I'm an artist. I write, I imagine things, I love stories. But this was not something I made up. This happened. I joined drama during my sophomore year, and honestly, it ended up being one of the best decisions I've made in high school. The people in that group were warm, loud, funny, and just genuinely good to be around. I really do think being part of that class changed me for the better. After every production, we have this tradition. Since we do 2 shows a year, that means twice a year we have a cast party. Everyone brings food, we play games, we hang out, and once everyone's eaten way too much and the energy starts getting chaotic, we play hide and seek. And when I say hide and seek, I don't mean in one little classroom. I mean the whole school, as long as the doors are open and we're allowed to be there. Our school is big, with more than 40 classrooms, plus all the side hallways, offices, music rooms, and everything else. So there are a lot of places to disappear into. But the biggest place, other than the gym, is the auditorium. And that's where almost all of this happens. The auditorium is laid out kind of strangely. You come in through these 2 heavy metal doors, and there's a walkway that curves between sections of seats. If you keep going, there's another set of double doors on the far side that leads toward the band and choir rooms. The seats are split into sections, with a handful of rows in each one. Up near the top, there's another walkway that mostly the tech and lighting people use so they can get to the booth. Then, at the bottom, there's the stage. It looks like a normal school stage at first, but the shape of it is odd, almost backwards somehow, and the backstage area is way tighter than you'd expect. I'm explaining all of that because, for some reason, that room is the center of everything. The first thing I personally saw happened at our most recent cast party, right before hide and seek started. I was walking around the school, checking possible hiding spots, and trying to plan where I might go once the game started. At one point, I thought, why not walk through the auditorium? All the lights were on, thankfully. The place was a little messy because the set from our last production was still being taken apart. I walked across the curved walkway toward the doors on the other side. Then, for some reason, I decided to turn the lights off. I figured hide and seek would be more fun if the auditorium was dark, so I flipped the switch. Then, just because, I glanced back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw this white streak shoot across the walkway behind me. Not a person walking, not someone ducking behind a seat. It was more like a flash, fast and pale, moving along the exact path I had just taken. Then it vanished into the dark. And the thing is, all of us already knew the auditorium felt wrong. Every single person in drama has been in there alone at least once, and almost everyone says the same thing. It feels like something is watching from one of the corners. Not just watching either. It feels angry. heavy, like whatever is there doesn't want you in its space. And we are not a group that scares easily. We will hide in pitch-black classrooms, crawl into cramped storage areas, and sit silently in the dark for ages during hide and seek. But the auditorium is different. People go in there alone, feel that pressure, and leave almost immediately. So when strange things happen in that room, we take it seriously. Last year, during another cast party, something happened that I didn't understand until much later. I think it was around the second or third round of hide and seek. I had already been found, so I was just wandering around, pretending to help look for people, even though I am terrible at finding anyone. Eventually, I ran into our drama teacher and one of the juniors, a guy named Rowan. They looked confused. Not scared exactly, but definitely shaken. I asked what was going on, and they told me they had been in the main office. That room is usually open during hide and seek, and it has monitors connected to the school cameras. They were looking at the camera feeds, trying to see if anyone was moving through the halls. On one camera, near the double doors by the auditorium and the music rooms, they saw a figure. A figure dressed completely in white. They said he started in the band room area, then walked through the hallway and opened the double doors into the auditorium. At first, everyone tried to explain it away. We started asking who had been wearing white that night, but the answer was no one. There was one guy with a black jacket that had a white lining, so for a little while we wondered if the camera had picked him up weirdly. Then we were told it was probably one of the girls, and that the camera just made her look different. That was the version we were given at the time. But at the most recent cast party, they admitted that wasn't true. They only said that so people wouldn't panic. They had no idea who or what they saw on that camera. Most of the encounters my class has talked about involve that same white figure. At the last cast party, one of my friends hid in the auditorium by himself. While he was tucked away, he looked under the curtains and saw boots pass by. Above the boots were white pants. Whoever it was walked past him and then just disappeared. Another friend told us he had seen something similar, but he also claimed he saw a man wearing what looked like a Sweeney Todd costume, and another time, someone in a wild old doctor costume. And because of that, I think I have an idea of who this figure might be. There was this former student, someone everyone in drama and band seemed to know and love. His name was Callan. He had this old-fashioned style, and people talked about him like he was a light in the building. He played lead roles in shows, including Sweeney Todd, and even after he graduated, he came back to perform at sporting events. I'm pretty sure he played saxophone, though it might have been trumpet. By all accounts, he was a wonderful person. I didn't know him as well as I wish I had. During the week of Christmas break, we found out he had died. I'm not going to go into details, but it was the kind of news that just takes the air out of everything. And what made it harder was that some of us still had to go to a speech and drama event after hearing it. After that, the sightings of the white figure started happening more and more. And that same friend, the one who saw the costumes, told me something I still think about. He swore, completely seriously, that when he was alone in the auditorium, he heard Callan's voice. I had never seen him look that scared before. Not joking scared, not trying to freak people out scared. Actually scared. These are only a few of the things that have happened, and they're only about this one figure. There are other stories too, smaller ones, stranger ones, the kind that come back to you later when you're trying to sleep. But the white figure is the one I keep thinking about, because every time I'm in that auditorium, even when the lights are on, I get the feeling that someone is still there, standing just out of sight, watching.